Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Hour. Happy Hour is a stream that I do on Fridays, regardless of whether it's St. Patrick's Day or not. If you don't drink on Happy Hour on St. Patrick's Day, you are definitely a racist. Absolutely F in the chat. Happy Hour is a stream that I do on Fridays at 5 p.m. Eastern Time where we kick back, have a drink or two, and we watch a woke training or conversation from start to finish. The whole thing. We watch the boring bits, we watch the cringy bits, because when we watch the woke in their element, when they think they're only talking to people who agree with them, we tend to learn an awful lot about the ideology of the woke left. We tend to learn what they're really up to because these guys like to say the quiet part out loud all the ever loving time. And all we need to do is sit back and listen to what they're saying. I truly do believe that people who attend Happy Hour on Friday and then Socialism Saturday, which is 6 p.m. on Saturdays, people who attend one and or both of those streams on a consistent basis know more about what is going on the woke left than any other person on the internet. I really do believe this. You know more than the journalists. You know more than the commentators. You know more than the pundits. The people who watch this stream regularly are a good year, 2, 3 years ahead of their understanding of what is actually going on. And the reason that that is true is because we actually listen to them. We're not playing sound bites. We're not taking things out of context. We are letting them say exactly and precisely what they want to say. And then we are listening to them and we're believing them when they tell us who they really are. And so today, guys, we're going old school. Just for fun, because we haven't done this in a while. We're going old school. And today we are going to be watching Ibram X Kendi. And we're going to be watching a talk that Ibram X Kendi gave at the Gilder Lehrman Center for something for the study of slavery, resistance, and abolition. This is at Yale University. Now, I want to give a great big shout out to Qbert, who is one of my longtime supporters. Just celebrated his 3rd year anniversary of being one of my supporters and being a member of my community. So I appreciate Qbert on so many levels. He is a wonderful member of my community, comes to my community Zoom calls all the time, which, by the way, guys, you can all do when you become a supporter. I'll talk about that in a minute. But Qbert came to our community Zoom call this past week, and he brought all this stuff with him. He was like, I've been doing some research. I found all this stuff on Yale University's website. I found all this stuff on Penn. He was like going around and looking at all these random academic centers that exist at these Ivy League universities, and he directed us to one specific center, which is at Yale University. And wouldn't you know it, if you go onto their YouTube channel and scroll through their live streams, they had a whole chat with Ibram X Kendi about Stamped from the Beginning, the definitive history of racist ideas in America. And this is from 4 years ago. This is from 2018. So this is in the era of Trump, which is when Ibram X Kendi really started to rise. And so we're going to go back. And one of the reasons that I do like going back and watching older talks, every once in a while, we usually watch newer stuff, but every once in a while we do go back into the archives. And I like doing that because in the past several years, a giant spotlight has been shown on people like Ibram X Kendi, like Robin DiAngelo, like all of the woke evangelists who are the Pied Pipers of white privilege and all that sort of stuff. And because they have a giant spotlight on them now, it is a lot more difficult for them to actually say what they're really doing now. But back in the day, they didn't have that. There was no giant spotlight yet. And so they were much more open and honest about what they actually believed because they weren't used to potentially ending up on national news if they said crazy stuff. Or they ended up on the news, but it was like in a way that they were being praised for their crazy stuff. But then they started getting on the news for saying legitimately crazy stuff that people were like, that sounds a little racist, Ibram X Kendi. And so they started modifying their language once they realized that that was going to happen. So we're going back into the archives today. This is from 2018, and it is about the book that he wrote, Stamped: The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America. Now, because we're going back in the day, I thought we would do a little old-fashioned Unwoke bingo today. Let me pop the Unwoke bingo card in the chat. Once that's in there, you guys can go ahead and click Generate Card. You're going to get a random card that is completely unique to you. You've got a free square in the middle. Then we're going for lines or we're going for corners. If you get a bingo in the chat, please make sure to shout out bingo. You don't win anything, but we will praise you and applaud for you and congratulate you. And then once we get a regular bingo in the chat, we do go for blackout bingo. This is just to kind of keep things fun, keep them light, keep us on our toes, make sure we're paying attention, all that sort of stuff. So you can go ahead and download your Unwoke bingo card in the chat. Bot, you already have the link. I already put it in there. You got to settle down and you can play along with us for bingo. All right, guys. Well, we do have a couple more orders of business before we get into the presentation today. Number one, I do just want to make sure that everyone is subscribed to my main Substack, which is Carlyn, Karlyn, .substack.com. This is now my home base for where I'm doing my content creation. Obviously, I'm still doing stuff on YouTube. Obviously, I'll never be able to quit Twitter because that's just the way it goes. But Substack is really beefing up their features. It's a really great site, and it is where I am publishing what I think is my best content, so that I'm kind of curating it for you. So you're only getting the really good stuff when you are subscribed. It is free to subscribe. It will always, well, it'll always be free to subscribe. Hopefully, I won't ever have to put up a paywall for some of my content. I'm really hoping. I need your help to keep it free, is essentially what I'm saying. So it is free to subscribe. You will get updates when you subscribe. And if you want to support the work I'm doing, you can come up with a paid subscription for $5 a month, $50 a year. You also can give more if you want to, which of course I appreciate. But if you don't want to, that's fine too. And that will get you access to a whole bunch of supporter perks. We're going to talk about supporter perks in a second. But first, I just want to take you through some of the stuff I've been covering this week. This was kind of like Gays Against Groomers Week. To be honest, I didn't intend it to be that way, but sometimes stuff just comes up that you have to cover. And I do actually think it is important that we talk about the problems with gays against groomers. Hopefully, Jamie takes it as constructive feedback. I don't think she's inclined to take it as constructive feedback, but hopefully she listens at some point and makes desperately needed improvements to her organization so that they don't crash and burn on the obvious trajectory that they're on right now to crash and burn under her most professional leadership. There are 3 articles about gays against groomers on the Substack right now and why everyone should be a little concerned about what is apparently the biggest and best anti-grooming organization in the anti-woke space. There are a lot of whistleblowers that came out talking about what's going on behind the scenes. I still have one more article I need to produce. I have more whistleblower evidence. I'm just taking a minute because Jamie has dragged me personally into this little conflict now. And I want to make sure that I'm making decisions with a rational head and not with a head that's, well, targeted at revenge for this bitch that has, done things that I don't really think are the most professional, but she obviously disagrees. So I'm just taking a minute. It is going to get published. It is going to get up. I just want to make sure I am in a good headspace to be able to publish it because I don't want to publish stuff for revenge. That is not the goal of this. The goal of this is to tell the truth. And I will be the one to tell the truth about what is going on with organizations in the anti-woke space. I've never shied away from this. People need to understand where their money is going. Jamie can have all the feelings about it, but that's just going to be the way it goes. So we got 3 Gays Against Groomers articles already on the Substack right now. If you missed yesterday's conversation with Aaron Lee, you've got to make time for this conversation. You really do. If you have kids that are in school, you have got to watch the stream I did yesterday with Aaron. You can find it on the YouTube channel. You can also find a link to it on the Substack. You can find a link to all the different projects she's doing. Her story is incredible. Her kid they were trying to transition her kid in school, and she found out about it. And she's been fighting back ever since. She has FOIA'd a whole metric F ton of stuff. She's been emailing me the stuff she FOIA'd from the school district today. I'm so looking forward to sitting down and actually looking for it. Apparently, they have a non-binary blood witch doing training for teachers in her school district. Yes, you heard that right. A non-binary blood witch is training teachers in this school district, and the teachers are taking the training from the non-binary blood witch and using that to make decisions about their children with and specifically keeping the parents out of the process. Specifically not telling the parents what's going on. Her story is unbelievable. You've got to hear it. Definitely watch that stream from yesterday if you haven't had the chance to already. Also, last night I wrote the latest essay in the Woke Mind series, and it's about what the cancel mob wants. The Woke Mind series is where I break down in plain English the psychology of the woke left, and I explain to you what they're really after when they're doing cancel mobs, that sort of thing. That article is on the Substack as well. I've got a couple more things I'm working on. Maybe they'll be launched this week, maybe next week. I'm not quite sure, but you can find all that information over at the Substack, carlin.substack.com. Another Substack, because I have like 8,000 Substacks, but I'm actually really excited about this one, and I want to tell you guys about it. So today I just launched one more Substack. It is unwokeart.substack.com. And the reason I launched this is because a couple of weeks ago, I kind of quietly launched a project that I've been thinking about for over 2 effing years. And basically, what it is I have always wanted to find a way to make what I'm calling unwoke art, which is art that is a cultural commentary and offers a different perspective about the things that are going on in our culture. And I want to start off with digital art like this. I do actually have much bigger plans for this down the road, but we're starting off with digital art right now because that's what I can do and the time commitment that I can make. And the best part about this is, so I'm making the designs available to everyone for free via unwokeart.com. You can do really whatever you want with the designs, but I am also selling merchandise with all the designs that I'm making on unwokeart.com. So how the Substack works is every single time I post a new design or I create a new unwoke design, I'm going to post it in the Substack. If you want updates, and I'll show you some of the designs in a second so you can get a feel for it. If you want updates about when new designs are coming out, then you need to subscribe to this Substack. I am not automatically subscribing. If you are subscribed to one of my other Substacks, I am not automatically subscribing you. Okay, so this is where you're going to be able to get updates if you want them. If you don't want updates when I post new designs, you don't have to sign up. But if you do want those updates, then I will be doing a new post on this Substack every single time I have a new design. And so let me just show you some of the stuff that I have right now. And these are just a couple of samples. So I've got this one with Joe Biden fiddling in front of the White House as it's burning in the background, and it says ignorance is bliss. I love that. I find it very whimsical. I'm thinking about taking that Joe Biden playing the violin figure and just like putting it into different locations as more crazy stuff happens in the Biden administration. So this might be something you see pop up over and over and over again, but that is where it is for right now. I just did this one today. I made Mitch McConnell look like the Grim Reaper in front of the U.S. Capitol, and I put the an honest politician as the name of this one. So I'm trying to do a little bit of satire with it. I'm trying to make it a little irreverent, a little kind of like a wink and a nod to what we all really know is going on. And I think Mitch McConnell dressed as the Grim Reaper with the caption "an honest politician" kind of says it all, doesn't it? I've got this one, which is what this was actually my original idea, which is a figure meditating in front of a burning city. I had this idea during the BLM riots in 2020, and written on it, it says, "Find your Zen as the world burns." Because even when there's chaos around us, we don't have to buy into it. I'm also working on a special Pork Fest series. It is the 20th anniversary of Pork Fest in June. So I'm doing 20 different porcupine Liberty designs that all have the Pork Fest 20 logo on them. And there's a whole bunch of different ones, but one of the favorites so far among people who have seen it is this one, which is the Much Liberty porcupine, which is not only a porcupine with a gun, but a porcupine with a gun with a liberty flame mounted on top of the guns. You can't get much more liberty than this. And so that's one of my designs there as well. There are a whole bunch of other designs in the Unwoke art store. I've got a whole bunch of porcupines up, as you see. That's kind of the main theme because I am working on that Pork Fest series. But there's other stuff that you can buy too. There's stickers, there's t-shirts, there's hoodies. Oh, I saw someone, I think Trendlin asked if you can get my Socialism Saturdays shirt in the Unwoke art store. Yes, you can. This is, and I'm working on an actively unwoke shirt as well. So you can get that the Socialism Saturday, join the cult, unwoke art shirt and hoodie, I think, in the store. You can get this one that says end systemic racism, defund the schools. This might be a good one for today for Ibram X Kendi. So, guys, I am building out the store. You can go in there and see. You can also actually get canvas prints if you want them. And if you have any merchandise that you really want, what you're going to be able to do is every single time I make one of these posts, just let me know what you want and I can make it. Maybe I can make it. I have to look into it. But I'm going to try to accommodate things. And all of this, guys, listen, if you just want to look at the images and you're like, these are kind of cool, and you just want to get the updates to see the images, that's fine. You can subscribe to this Substack for free. Again, it's unwokeart.substack.com. So you'll get an email every single time I post a new design, but you're also going to be able to buy merchandise with the designs on them. You're going to be able to sign up as a paying member of this Substack, and all of the proceeds from this go to support my work and keep me in business. And then you get something cool. And I just think this is going to be fun. I love creating this stuff. We can do so many creative things to kind of poke fun and mock woke culture and just the insanity of politics and all of that stuff. The possibilities are literally endless. And so I think this is going to be a ton of fun. It's a project that I've had in my mind for 2 years. And thank you, AI Art, which is providing the foundation for all of this. Basically, I'm creating the art in AI, and then I'm making edits and I'm doing touch-ups and things like that. I am manipulating the AI art. I'm not just exporting it from AI and then like posting it. I'm manipulating it and doing other stuff too. But the AI piece of it saves me so much time. It is a nice quick way to get the images I have in my head into reality, and then I can take it from there and manipulate them and make them even better for you guys. So thank you, AI Art, for allowing me to launch this project that I've had in my head for 2 years. I'm really excited about it, and I wanted to share it with you guys, and I hope you'll sign up on the Substack. And when you sign up as a supporter on the Substack, and that's my Actively Unwoke Substack, but we'll also do it for the Unwoke Art Substack too, and really anywhere that you're supporting my work, whether that be on Locals, whether that be on Patreon, whether that be as a YouTube channel member, because you can support my work in a variety of ways. What happens is you get access to some extra perks. One of those extra perks is that you get access to my supporter Discord. One of the things we do in my supporter Discord is we do a weekly movie night, and we are watching this weekend one of my favorite movies. I'm so glad we voted for this one. There was a poll up in my locals community for which movie we were watching. There were Boondock Saints, The Departed, but the winner is Gangs of New York. This is an incredible movie. If you've never seen it, Daniel Day-Lewis is amazing. The story is amazing. The music is amazing. The fight scenes are amazing. Everything is amazing about this movie. I'm so looking forward to watching it on Sunday at 8 p.m. We do a different movie every single week. And so please join us on Sunday in the supporter Discord. If you are not a supporter yet, you have plenty of time to sign up. Again, you can sign up on my Substacks. You can sign up to become a paying member of my locals, to become a supporter on Patreon, even on this here YouTube channel. If you are a YouTube channel member, you will get access to this. Come and join us on Sunday for movie night. We don't just watch the movie, we do trivia. We have discussions. It really is just such a nice break from the insanity of the world. And if you're not excited about Gangs in New York, just wait till next week. We'll be watching a completely different movie, and then you can join us then. So make sure you're signed up as a supporter. Come and join us and check it out. It's going to be awesome. All right, guys, that is the last of my programming notes for the moment. But you guys know that it's happy hour, and so I have to start off the stream by drinking a beer. Now, I know Bot is going to be very disappointed, but there's not going to be a vote today for the beer, because normally what I do is I get 4 beers and then I have you guys in the chat vote on which beer I drink first. We're not doing a vote today. You want to know why? Because I don't need to do a vote to know what the vote would be. The vote would be for Shamrock Shake, which allegedly, according to the woman at the beer store that I bought this at last week and have been hiding from my husband ever since, I had to bury this beer deep within my refrigerator under all sorts of other food so that it wouldn't be found and opened prior to today's stream. According to the woman at the beer store, this beer is actually green. And so, of course, we are going to be starting with this one. This is from Magnify Brewing Company in New Jersey. Of course, it would be New Jersey. And this is a smoothie sour ale with vanilla ice cream, peppermint, and vanilla. I don't know if it's a beer or a smoothie. But I knew that's what you guys would vote for. So let's open it up. Let's see how green this beer really is. Also, I mean, my God, can we just talk about, like, I don't like McDonald's all that much. Okay, like, I mean, it's good and nostalgic and all that stuff, but you know what I do like from McDonald's is Shamrock Shakes. Come on, did I get something on my camera? I think something just, like, I think the beer literally just got on my camera. There's a little explosion. Oh, it's good. So McDonald's, like, Shamrock Shakes are the best. It's like the only I go to McDonald's like once a year and it's for Shamrock Shake because they're so good. It's like crack. All right. It is green, guys. Oh, check this out. Check this out. It's green. Oh, it's green. It's not even like a muddy green. It's like a real green. Holy shit. Holy shit. Happy St. Patrick's Day, everyone. Cheers. Let's see. I was not expecting it to be this green. Oh my God, that's actually really good. Hang on. I'm going to take a picture of this. Do you guys all want to be in my picture of my beer? Oh shit, hang on. I got to put it down to open up my phone. Ah! Hang on. Oh, shoot. No! Why isn't my phone working? I just want to take a picture of my beer to show it off. Why is this so difficult? Here. Everyone's going to be in the picture. Got the chat in the background. Cheers, everyone. All right, I got my picture of my green beer. Let's get started with happy hour. And of course, if you're drinking anything fun, please make sure you put it in the chat. I just dropped my beer can on the floor. I was rescuing it. Let us know what you're drinking. I'm so excited. I'm much more excited about this beer than I thought I would be. It is good, though. It does kind of taste like McDonald's Shamrock Shake. I am going to Twitter it, bot. Relax, okay? All right, guys. Mount that like button if you would be so kind. Again, we are watching Ibram X Kendi, a talk he did in 2018. What was it? Like 4 years ago. And this is about all of the history of racism in the United States, according to the anti-racist god, Kendi himself. Let's get this party started.
David Blight. I direct the Gilder Lehrman Center for the Study of Slavery, Resistance, and Abolition. And we've done a number of events over 20 years that have particularly focused on that middle word, resistance. I think this one does too, among other things. I just want to announce a couple of quick things and then get right at a conversation with Ibram Kendi. We have a major conference in a month, or is it only 3 weeks now? On November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. It's called Fighting Modern Slavery, What Works? At the Gilder Lehrman Center, we've had an initiative to study human trafficking and modern slavery now for 5 or 6 years. We've had no less than 9 research fellows in all kinds of disciplines come through as modern slavery scholars. Our current one is Lou DeBaca, who's here today.
Hang on, we got a super chat from the beloved Murphy's Pool. If someone drops off Peroni at your house, you have to put it up for a vote. No, Murphy's Pool. No, I will never drink Italian water beer. You can send that to Joshua. He will appreciate it. But thank you. I appreciate the super chat. Yes, I've already got. I'll put the bingo card link in the chat again. Actually, you may not have been here for it.
The former ambassador of human trafficking in the Obama administration. And we're drawing together an international group of writers, scholars, again, many disciplines represented, who will tackle this question. What methods?
Here is the link to the bingo card if you guys missed it.
What kinds of movements against the current problem of modern slavery and human trafficking have worked, which haven't, which ought to work? That's a very disputed, controversial question in that field, as you will learn, but it's a very useful question. And the base of that conference is a working group that we've sponsored now for almost 2 years of about 15 or so international scholars and writers who study this question. So anyway, November 1st to the 3rd, please sign up. And if any of you are not, for some reason, on our mailing list, our email list, our newsletter list, please give your email before you leave to Michelle Zacks, who's in the orange sweater down here, or to Tom Thurston, who will put his hand up over there. He's got the great curly hair over there. You can't miss Tom. He's great at other things. But, anyway, welcome. There's another event in December. On December 6th,
how you know it's
Ta-Nehisi
like
Coates
higher ed.
campus, whom a lot of you have read. And he's going to conduct a conversation with me. I get to be on the other side about a new book on Douglass. Ta-Nehisi, as some of you probably know, grew up in Baltimore.
Ta-Nehisi Coates is the person who made Jordan Peterson a comic book villain.
Great admirer of Douglass. He knows his Douglass. And supposedly he's reading my book. I hope so. Anyway, I want to introduce quickly Ibram Kendi and then talk about this remarkable book that has now been out for a couple of years. He's a professor at American University, but before that, he did his bachelor's degree at NYU. Actually, no, at Florida A&M, excuse me. You did some work at NYU, forgive me, at Florida A&M. I know that when people mess up the BA or the BS, uses the BS. I especially hate it when they say I got my bachelor's degree at Michigan. It's at Michigan State, and that is a mortal sin to say that. Anyway, there's graduate work at Temple University, PhD at Temple. He has taught at Albany State in New York. He's also taught at Brown for a year, and he is now in American Studies, or African American Studies, at American University, where he directs a new center. The center is called Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, and it's connected to the Department of History at American U. It's a unique center. There's really no other center quite devoted in the same way to the question of anti-racism as this new center is. They have all sorts of initiatives going, and I want to talk with Ibram about that. They have a team system they've structured. I want you to talk a little bit about that. They also have an initiative going with the Frederick Douglass Family Initiative. Maybe you can talk about that as well. Now, Ibram's first book, which was, I think, a dissertation, is entitled The Black Campus Movement, Black Students and the Radical Reconstitution of Higher Education in 1965-1972. It's the second book we're going to talk about here tonight that won the National Book Award, entitled Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, published by Nation Books in 2016. And Ibram tells the remarkable story that you can pick up on of getting that award, I think only a day or two after the 2016 election.
Look at that eye roll.
Which made a rather somber evening much more thrilling, I hope. But anyway, you can tell that. There's a third book in the...
Talk about saying the quiet part out loud. My God, they're like, well, you know, racism is still alive in America because that evil Trump was elected. No, American University and Georgetown are two different schools. Both woke as shit, but two different schools. I'm not gonna lie. I'm like thinking about a McDonald's Shamrock Shake right now, and I'm like 50-50 on whether I want to text Victor to be like, can you just go through the drive-thru and get me a no? But then I was like, but I have my own Shamrock Shake. But like now I'm craving McDonald's Shamrock Shake. It's like a pepper. It is peppermint. It's like tastes like vanilla and peppermint. It tastes like a McDonald's Shamrock Shake. It really does. It's just not as thick. The only difference really, actually, I don't need to text Victor. I take that back. The only difference really between this and like a McDonald's Shamrock Shake is the McDonald's Shamrock Shake is like thicker.
Works now, entitled How to Be an Anti-Racist, a Memoir of My Journey. Ibram's arrived already at the point of writing a memoir about this. Stamped from the beginning is not a memoir. It is a remarkable 500-year history of an intellectual history mostly, of ideas, but also a book, those of you who've read it know this, it is a book full of mini biographies of all sorts of people. It's a book divided into 5 parts by 5 names of Americans, and I'd like to come back to that with you too, how and why you chose those 5 names to hang these 5 vast eras of American history on. It is a book that is, I don't want to use the word balanced. It's complicated, ironic, complex, at times even ambivalent. But it doesn't just choose sides about who's a racist and who's an anti-racist in the past. The abolition movement gets a roughing over in this book, but it also has great admiration for certain abolitionists. Well into the 20th century, it takes on major iconic figures of the Black protest movement.
Welcome to higher education. This is what higher education is.
For this problem of just what was racist and anti-racist, and how did the two collide and meet and inform each other through time. It is a bold book, and for good reason. It has gotten enormous attention. And we're here today to basically talk about it for a half hour or 40 minutes, and then all of you get to pipe right in too. I think we have mics, we do have mics out in the audience. I actually want to begin with a piece you just published in the Atlantic, if that's okay. It's a piece called A House Still Divided. It's in the current, I think it's current, October 18 issue of the Atlantic, where Ibram, you argue that the current threat of racism is more insidious now than it has been in the past, and you lay out a host of ways that you see that or you believe that's the case. Could you lay out that argument a little bit?
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. It's truly an honor to be here. Thank you so much, David, for organizing, for your staff for organizing this talk. Of course, I know you're touring, and so to be able to
I'm touring with you right here now.
It's truly, I think it's, hopefully we'll have a nice conversation. This piece in the Atlantic,
Oh, did you get an ad, Boom?
So
Thank you.
The issue itself.
They're doing it during live stream now. I don't.
Is democracy dying?
I'm sorry. I don't know what to say.
A series of sort of authors sort of seek to answer that question, and I make the case that it is dying, and it's dying because of this divided house. And so, of course, speaking from Lincoln's 1858 speech. But I make the case that the current division is between racism and anti-racism. Mm-hmm. And just as Lincoln said that the nation will either become all one or all the other, meaning slavery or anti-slavery, I think it's the same thing for racism and anti-racism. Mm-hmm. And in the piece, very quickly, I think many of you are very familiar with all of the different ways in which people's votes are being suppressed.
Oh yes, their votes are being suppressed. Sure.
With the fact that people are arming themselves.
Definitely.
believing that their people, particularly white people, are facing a genocide and killing people, as a result. I think many of you are familiar with sort of.
I want to pause on that. So okay, I don't, for those who might not know me, I don't believe that he is correct that there are absolutely white people in the world who believe that white people are facing a genocide. I don't agree with that. For all of the shit that the woke ideology gives to white people because it places them at the very bottom of the oppression hierarchy, I personally do not believe it is beneficial for anyone who happens to be white to view themselves as victims of this ideology. I don't think it's a good idea for many reasons, not the least of which is that when these people use the term white or whiteness, they usually aren't even referring to skin color. They are referring to capitalism. That is what they consider to be whiteness. When they are trying to abolish whiteness, they are talking about capitalism. They're not talking about your skin color. But a lot of people, because this has not been explained well on the conservative right at all, they believe they're going after white people for their skin color. That is not what's happening. I continue to be really, really afraid at the amount of rhetoric that I see on the conservative right that is beefing up what I think is going to end up being the second coming of a white power movement. I really do. Elijah Schaffer, and I might watch this on stream. I haven't decided yet. And I'm really upset with him for doing this. Elijah Schaffer had that anti-white asshole from on his stream the other day. That's not good. That guy and the movement that he represents, the no white guilt asshole, Jason Kona, or Cone, whatever his name is, that guy is dangerous. That whole ideology is dangerous. And I've continued to see people on the right lift up these people who are trying to take advantage of the divisions that are being created by the woke ideology, and they're trying to use it to create a race war. And I don't think it's good. And so I really want to encourage everyone. I know that a lot of people have told you this is about skin color. I know that Ibram X Kendi is going to make it sound like this is about skin color, but we have watched so much of this stuff at this point that it is really not in dispute that this is not about skin color. It is about capitalism. It is a Marxist ideology that is grasping at whatever straws it can grasp at to create divisions in our society so that they can gain as much power as possible, so that they can destabilize the system, so they can attack capitalism, so they can usher in their Marxist utopia. Do not listen to people who tell you this is about skin color. This is not about skin color, all right? It's not. And I'm really worried that people are not getting the message or they're just trying to use it to take advantage of it. Anyway, let's keep going.
Many different ways in which, and I just really wanted to sort of lay out this dialectic. And I wanted to sort of push back, as I try to do in Stamped, against the dialectic of racism and not racism. I really wanted to sort of show this collision. And hopefully I was able to do that.
Well, I think you did. I mean, it is if you haven't read it, it is a sobering little punch between the eyes, playing off the house.
That's exactly right, Tyler. That's exactly right. Asians, most of the time, though not all of the time, are considered white. Irish are considered white. And if you come and watch Gangs of New York with us on Sunday, you guys are going to find that the Irish were not always accepted. We watched Far and Away this past week, and it talked about how Irish used to be discriminated against in America. Now they're considered to having assimilated to whiteness. Italians are considered white people of color. So you're absolutely correct about this. Now, the only exception to this is when it is beneficial for the woke left to do like a Stop Asian Hate campaign where they're talking about hate crimes committed against Asians. And they do that to, again, drum up this dissension and drum up infighting and stuff like that. So if it is beneficial for them to consider Asians to be oppressed, like when COVID first came out and they were like, it's racist against the Chinese. They will absolutely pursue that if it is beneficial to them. But if it is not beneficial to them, then Asians are absolutely considered to be white.
Of Lincoln's, and you're suggesting we're in a house divided between racism and anti-racism, and you say, just like Lincoln said, we will either become all one or all the other. Take that home tonight or tomorrow. Anyway, indeed. Now you wrote this.
I
don't know
agree
exactly
with this
when you
Zoomer
wrote
Union,
it, Stan.
100%.
You were writing it during the Obama years, maybe even the later Obama
Yes,
years.
the second term.
Right. So much was going on.
That's a mistake.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the police shootings,
Yes.
up Charleston. Well, it was done before Charlottesville, but Charleston's in 2015, so maybe you had the book done by then. I don't
Well,
know.
really, the period was Trayvon
Martin.
Well, that's
Right.
why we're watching him, Jed, so
Okay.
he can reveal
So
himself.
this new phenomenon of white supremacy and racism and violence is bursting out in America as you're writing this book. But the book you're writing is from the colonial period, even before the colonial period, all the way through the 20th century. And you're doing a deep history here at the same time. Could you talk a little bit about that? A lot of us have had to do this or thought about doing this or try to do this. Graduate students here in the audience, we have lots of discussions about how does one mix one's scholarship with activism? How do you know when it's your activism on the page you just wrote? And how do you know when you're still a scholar?
Oh, I find it surprising that they even acknowledge that there's a difference between scholarship and activism, because they certainly don't seem to act like they understand the difference. All scholarship is activism. If people really think that Ibram X Kendi's book isn't activism, I just don't know what to tell you.
What do you remember about that dilemma or that problem? Of what's going on right in front of you in the society while you're writing about Cotton Mather or Jefferson or Douglas or whoever?
I think I remember, two major problems. The first is clearly if you're writing a book of this length, I'm sorry, it's a little bit long, it takes quite a bit of time. And so probably for 2 years, I was working upwards of 12 hours a day on it. At the same time, I wanted to not be at my computer working on this book. I wanted to be in the streets with other people.
Oh yeah,
and so
you got
I
a lot of
think
experience in the
having to
streets,
sort of
Ibram.
restrict
I'm sure
myself,
you do. Yeah.
And keep myself and recognize, or at least I thought and hoped that this would have been more effective use of my specific time.
Sure.
Was very difficult because I saw the ways in which people were being harmed in a number of different types of ways. And I felt almost as if that should be me. And I feel like, am I sort of convincing myself to stay out of harm's way? I mean, there's all types of intellectual exchanges going on. The other thing, and I think from the sort of the notion of the scholar, I think for me, the work came in very early on. In other words, I think once I was able to define a racist idea and an anti-racist idea.
What are
once I
the
was able to
definitions, Ibram?
define, and we'll go into this later, a segregationist idea and assimilationist idea.
Right.
That really, I mean, for me, if there was any sort of inflection of politics, it was really through that. But once you define it in a clear way, then as an historian, you just go and search, right, of those ideas, and then you, of course, write those ideas out.
But I have to tell you, as a historian myself, and reading your book, one has I'm not, I'll try to think of critical things too, but
Right?
it's amazing how much reading you did for this. It's amazing how many different kinds of historical periods and forces. The past is always different, and then the past has so many pasts. You had to get your head around everything from Puritanism to modernity to you name it to do this. and you had to read some biographies because there's a lot of people. You do these 2-page, 3-page, or if it's Angela Davis or Du Bois or Garrison, you do many more pages.
I would prepare yourself for some meandering. Again, this is a lecture at a college. But these are the moments we train for, guys. Because if we can sit through the meandering, we know we're going to get those golden nuggets. We know we will. They're going to say the quiet part out loud. It happens every time. These are the get your knitting, get your beer. We train for this, to sit through the boring shit so we can find the good stuff.
How did you organize? I mean, as a writer, I want to know, how did you organize writing a book like this? 500 years of this idea of racism and anti-racism over time. Who do you choose? How do you pick? What criteria? How did you do that?
It was fluid. Certainly, I think in the broadest
Books do happen, sort
Yeah.
of, right?
Yeah.
We think we write them, but sometimes it just happens.
Well, I think I created probably like a 500-page outline, chronological outline.
Really?
That was also thematic.
Uh-huh.
And so when I was sort of researching, I was sort of filling in and when I say chronological but also thematic, as many of you know, you take a novel, for instance, you have this sort of scene, and then at certain parts of the scene, they go back on a particular theme, right? It's this sort of same thing. And so I did that, and I sort of poured all of the research into that sort of massive writing outline. And then after I sort of finished researching, which I guess I never really finished researching because, even as I was writing, I was still researching. I then went back through.
That's the scariest part. Right? It's
Yeah.
never over,
Exactly.
but it has to be.
Yes, which is another story. But I went back through, and then I went back through and sort of reconceived or prepared the writing outline for writing.
Uh-huh.
And so I had to sort of go through all of these concepts and make connections and really think through how it's sort of writed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the reasons I think I was able to be effective, because I spent so much time sort of on that writing outline, and it made the writing that much easier.
But from the beginning, you were planning the whole 500 years.
So that was.
We could get lost in the weeds here, just
Yeah.
two writers trying to understand how the hell do you do this, But,
So, I mean, as you know, many scholars make the case that racist ideas really emerged in the 1800s, early 1800s. And so that's where I started.
Right.
But once again, taking this definition, once I started going back, I saw ideas in the 1770s, and then I went back and saw them in the 1670s, and I kept going back and saw them in the 1500s. And so, I think the definition itself and staying true to that definition and looking based on that definition, I think was critical. And then not necessarily being scared, for the lack of a better term, to go against the dominant sort of chronology.
Okay.
And really just stick with that definition. I think that was critical.
Could you quickly lay out that? Not everyone's read this
Sure.
book. The definition you used of racist and anti-racist and segregationist and assimilationist. Yeah.
Sure. So I defined a racist idea as any idea that suggests a racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. And Stan from the beginning was a
Okay. So he's actually done something that isn't often done. And so we just need to take a moment and acknowledge it. He has acknowledged the definition of a racist idea. But let's make sure we actually hold him to this definition. So what he said, hang on. What did he say? I'm looking for it on the, here it is. A racist idea, according to Ibram X Kendi, is an idea that suggests a racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. Is that the definition of racism that they're using now? Now, what Kendi is going to say is he's going to try to apply this idea to outcomes. And he's going to say, if there are disparities in outcomes in terms of educational attainment, in terms of income, in terms of whatever outcome you want, if there are disparities in outcomes, that disparity means that it is a suggestion that one racial group is superior to another because the outcome is different. That's what he's going to say and try to twist it into. I'm betting. Because this is not the definition they're using now.
That suggests a racial group is superior or inferior to another racial group in any way. And Stand from the beginning was a history of anti-Black racist ideas. And so I was looking for ideas suggesting that there was something inferior about a particular Black racial group. And I say Black racial group because, as many of you know, Black people are not a monolith. They're literally a collection of racialized groups. So you have ideas that have been created to denigrate Black women, Black men, Black poor, Black elites, Black students, right? And you can go on, which is one of the reasons why the book was long. And so there was that. And then anti-racist ideas are obviously quite the opposite. It's ideas suggesting that the racial groups are equal, or equals, I should say. And then when we think about racist ideas, I found, and this is really what caused me to write the book in and of itself, that generally speaking, historians and even other scholars had defined a racist idea in a more narrow way, focusing specifically on notions of biological racial hierarchy.
In the tradition of science.
Precisely. And so what sort of led me to write the book it was sort of coming out of my first book in my research on Black student activism in the late 60s, Black student activists who were, pushing for African-American studies, saying that the current disciplines in the academy were racist. But at the time, in the late 1960s, these ideas about biological hierarchy and distinction were marginal. These weren't the ideas that were dominating the academy in the late 60s. The ideas that were dominating the academy in the late 60s were notions of cultural hierarchy or behavioral hierarchy. And so these students were classifying these notions of Black people as pathological, as racist ideas. But of course, those definitions had never made their way, into the scholarship. And so I, of course, wanted to bring that in. And ultimately, I defined the more traditional, for the lack of a better term, type of racist ideas as segregationist ideas. So these are notions of biological racial hierarchy, making the case that...
That's fucking so sneaky. Do you know what he's doing? He started by defining racist ideas as saying that one racial group is superior to another racial group. And then he was like, hold up. If I define racist ideas as saying one group is superior to another group based on their skin color, I'm not going to be able to call everything racist today because there aren't enough examples of real people in the real world saying that racism, saying like racist shit, like white people are better than Black people or something like that. So what he did is he said, you know what? All of those people who are saying that white people are better than Black people, they don't have racist ideas. That's not what racist ideas means. They have segregationist ideas. It's a completely different type of racism to say that white people are better than Black people. They're segregationists. So we're going to put them in a separate category over here, and then we're going to redefine what racist ideas actually means.
A particular racial group is therefore permanently inferior.
By nature.
By nature. And then I showed, and then the second type of racist idea was making the case that racial groups, or in the case of Stand from the Beginning, Black people, were not inferior by nature, but inferior by nurture.
Oh, there's systemic racism.
And so they were...
There it is. That's the difference. He's saying that segregationist ideas are saying that Black people are inherently inferior, but racist ideas is Black people are inferior by nurture. What he's going to define as nurture is systemic racism. There it is.
Aren't inferior as a result of their genes or the biology. They were inferior as a result of their environment, their culture, their behavior.
Systemic racism.
And assimilationist.
And even a Garrison fit into that.
Precisely. And so assimilationists, as I identify them, typically made the case that Black people were either culturally or behaviorally inferior. But then they were like, well, since they're not innately or biologically inferior, we can and should civilize and develop them. While segregationists were like, no, you can't civilize and develop them. You need to kill them, segregate them, incarcerate them, or deport them.
Well, thank you. I mean, that boils a lot of ideas down to 4 workable definitions. And I can imagine your process of deciding, okay, finally got my definitions. Now I can go. Can I ask you?
Sure.
You divide the book in 5 parts. Now there's a lot going on in these parts, but you give each of them a name, a person. Can I just name the person? And you can tell us why you chose it. I mean, I find that fascinating. Colonial period, Cotton Mather. Go first with Cotton Mather.
Sure. I think Yalians know a little bit about Cotton Mather.
Well, they may not.
His ghost may be around here somewhere. How dare you? But
he's not one of those. Well, maybe he is. I don't know.
So Cotton Mather, for those of you who don't know, he was involved in the naming of Yale University. But Cotton Mather was the longtime pastor in Boston of what was called the North Church. His father was Increase Mather, who was a longtime president of Harvard, as well as the
Cotton Mather was a jackass.
North
just
Church
so we're clear, he was an asshole.
And his grandfather was Richard Mather, who helped found Harvard, and who was in the first sort of migration of university-trained intellectuals to New England in the 1630s. And so this was the sort of Mather dynasty that historians had really talked about. And Cotton Mather was more illustrious than both his father and grandfather. He was the first American to be inducted into the Royal Society. I'm saying all this to say that he was a pivotal intellectual figure in colonial America. His biographers make the case that he published more than all of his contemporaries combined. But he was also a pivotal figure in discussions of race. And so in the colonial era, there was a debate going on about whether Black people can become Christian. And Cotton Mather...
And if they are, what happens?
Yeah, precisely why there was a debate, right? Slave owners were like, no, they can't become Christian, because in British common law, if you become Christian, you become free. So they were like, no. Well, Cotton Mather made the case that they could become Christian. And the way he went about making that case was to say, we need to, as St. Paul does, divide the body from the soul. The body can be enslaved, but we need to proselytize to the soul. And when we do, and that soul, that Black soul becomes Christian, that Black soul also becomes white. And so he was critical in the formation of assimilationist ideas, because historically, assimilationists have sought to make Black people white.
This is fascinating. I hope this doesn't sound like your oral.
What do they mean when they say assimilationists have sought to make Black people white? I have an idea about this, but I wanna hear from you guys in the chat. What does he mean when he says assimilationists want to make Black people white? Yes, he is talking about whiteness, Yasmin. And I want you to know too, I'm looking for a good Black feminist presentation for tomorrow. I haven't forgotten about this. What does he mean, do you think? Bot, I need you to elaborate, please. Making them participate in capitalism. Exactly. They want what they want. So remember, these people think that the categories of white and Black were created when white people brought black slaves to America, and then they created the category of white to be able to build up entire systems and enterprises that were only designed to keep black people down and to keep white people in charge. That is capitalism. Because slavery was a fundamental component of capital. Slavery was driven by capitalism. And so they say that the evil capitalists, the white capitalists, design these systems to specifically keep black people as oppressed so that they could make money off them, essentially. What they're saying is that when they wanted black people to assimilate to whiteness, they want them to assimilate to the capitalist system. Assimilate and participate in the capitalist system.
World's exams now. But Age of Revolution, Thomas Jefferson.
So
you can have it.
Sure. So in the
Master
colonial
time.
era, the science was largely theological. By early America, science or intellectual ideas started to become more secular.
They never say that.
They
I've never heard them say
specifically
that.
started to become more secular due to the influence of Thomas Jefferson. As many of you know, he wasn't that religious, even though he, of course, he was adamant about religious freedom. He himself wasn't that religious, and his major sort of literary text, of course, was a nonfiction text. And I just wanted to show, and I think I show in the text, how his ideals on race were critical in shaping the debate on race in early America. And not only in the early United States, but even part of this trans-Atlantic Enlightenment debate over notions of creation. And so he was pivotal, and then he, of course, dies on the eve of the abolitionist movement. And so part of the consideration of characters or major characters.
Let me see. Carlin, black people say whiteness, but they also use the term the dominant society. Have you heard that one? I think that, okay, so the majority of times that I've heard black people say whiteness, they're using it in a fundamentally different way. This is not exclusively true. I'm not talking about people on the left. I'm talking about just like regular kind of black people, not leftists, not activists, not anything like that. I've heard them use the term, but they say it in a fundamentally different way than I think these people say it. I haven't thought about this all that much, Yasmin, so I'll give it some thought. But I think again, this is my lived experience, so this may or may not be applicable. I haven't focused on this enough yet. But I think that they're using it in a fundamentally different way than which Ibram X Kendi is going to use it, because he's a leftist activist. So he has different definitions. Nope, it's capitalism. It absolutely is not any of those things. This is all a distraction. This is what you're talking about, Fish Addict, are the things that conservative influencers have told you to lie to you. These things are never mentioned. If you think they're attacking Western civilization and Christianity, these things are never mentioned. Individualism is mentioned because individualism is a component of capitalism. Self-determination is mentioned because self-determination is a component of capitalism. These people never talk about Christianity. I cannot emphasize this enough. I know that the Christians watching really, 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 really want to be persecuted. I understand that you guys have an epic persecution fetish where you are constantly looking for any indication that Christians are persecuted. But what I'm telling you, based on having watched thousands of hours of these people talk, is that they quite literally never talk about Christianity. It is almost never mentioned. When they say whiteness, they mean capitalism. And they do mention capitalism by name in almost every single presentation they do. They do not mention Western culture. There are Eastern cultures that have capitalism. This is not about West versus East. That is another lie that your influencers have told you. It is only and exclusively about capitalism. Well, did he talk about Cotton Mather's religious beliefs? He didn't go into it in any detail. He said Cotton Mather was a preacher, is the son of a preacher. Okay. That's talking about his profession. That's not talking about Christianity as the great evil in the world.
Was not only them being a pivotal figure, central figure in the race.
You think Christianity is anti-woke? Christians, not all of them, but a nice big portion of them, are some of the most woke people on the planet. Christianity is inherently woke. It's either woke on the political left, where they've actually taken over the churches, or they're woke on the political right. But saying that Christianity is anti-woke is a lie, bro. I'm sorry. That's not true. That is one of the biggest lies I've ever heard.
Racial debate, but also their time frames.
They are, and off of Jefferson, you can do a lot of intellectual history of a lot of other people.
Precisely.
The third.
Well, if you have the idea that they've labeled Christianity as whiteness, then you are not watching my content. And I know you're watching my content, Fish Addict, so I have to wonder where you got that idea, because it has literally never come up on a happy hour where they are labeling whiteness as Christianity. It has never once, not in the 2-year history of happy hour, has this come up. So you're getting the idea from somewhere. Where are you getting it? I'm going to guess it's another influencer. Savrit says, imagine you needed a remaining population to be dumbed down on fast food and hip hop, becoming a permanent slave of the mind. A permanent slave won't revolt if they believe they are the highest beings. Oh God, Savrits. Well, even more than that, that's a really good, I love this super chat for so many reasons, but even more than that, Savrits, a permanent slave won't revolt if they feel that they've reached the pinnacle of what they can reach. So human beings are so messed up in a lot of ways. Our brain can trick us into believing things that are not true. For instance, people can feel like they're at the top of their game. They can feel like they've reached the highest level that they will ever reach. And all that's really happened is they've gotten kind of surrounded by like a toxic group of morons who all who are all experiencing the same delusion that they've reached the highest level they can reach. But there are levels that are infinitely higher than that they can reach, but they convince themselves there's nowhere else I can go. This is the best. This is as high as I can go. It's really effed up, and it has to do with self-worth at the end of the day. Christianity is not capitalism adjacent, if that's what you're talking about, Jonalyn. No, it's not. No, it's not. Looks like I'm going to be pissing some Christians off today. It's all good. Then where did you get the idea that Christianity is whiteness? Because you didn't get it from me. You didn't get it from Happy Hour. You didn't get it from this channel. So where did you get it? Now, Fish Addict, you can choose to be offended that I called you on your bullshit, which I'm known to do. You have been on my channel long enough that you know I call people in the chat on their bullshit, and I say when they're wrong. I wouldn't be teaching you anything if I didn't do that. I have never, in the 2-year history of Happy Hour, said that Christianity is code for whiteness, because it is not. In any way. It's just not. And anyone who said it was is not telling the truth. Well, but that's not true either, as we've already established. Whiteness is capitalism. Capitalism is whiteness. That's what it means.
Third section of the book, you hang it on William Lloyd Garrison, which was a very interesting choice.
Yeah, and so I think this period was certainly a period I could have chosen many different people.
Sure.
Of course, Douglas could have, David may have not have been happy, or may have been happy about that. I don't know. But I
quote him a lot, and really, really nicely.
But I think first his lifetime particularly his public life, spanned from roughly 1829, so 3 years after Jefferson's death, to the end of Reconstruction. And so clearly, when you're thinking about periods in American history, that's really a critical sort of period that we can sort of slice off. And secondly, of course, he was a pivotal intellectual figure in the racial debate. And I think what he, and another reason why I picked him was because he popularized quite possibly the most seductive racist idea, a racist idea that is still very prominent within the community of people who consider themselves liberal, even progressive, or even radical. And that is, in his case, he made the case that slavery wasn't just dehumanizing, that this oppressive, violent system was literally dehumanizing Black people. He often talks about slavery making Black people into brutes. And I sort of track this sort of what I've later, since the book, called the oppression inferiority thesis. To first, it was slavery making Black people into brutes. Then it was segregation. Right now, it's poverty. Right. Other people have made the case, other sort of types of sort of things. But this idea that racism itself or discrimination wasn't just sort of harming people, but it was literally leading to inferior behaviors. Was a case that he made, and he made that case to sort of shock Americans into seeing how bad slavery is.
And he had huge influence.
Precisely.
I mean, we could stop on any one. Actually, let's stop on this one a moment. This is the period, of course, I work in. I think you're doing a particularly deft job with Harriet Beecher Stowe, the most popular book of the 19th century for sure, and one of the most popular ever. Anyone's ever read it or taught it knows it's fraught with problems about race. At the same time, it is this book that revolutionized the 1850s, exploded on the scene like no other book ever. But talk about that a little bit. And that's actually a little paragraph
I'm
passage
actually
I was even going to read and have you respond to.
How many people here have read Uncle Tom's Cabin? Uncle Tom's Cabin is a legitimately great book. If you haven't read Uncle Tom's Cabin, I would strongly encourage you to read Uncle Tom's Cabin. I'm just curious about how many people have actually read it. I read it a long time ago. I read it in college, not because it was an assignment, but because I wanted to read it. So it looks like some people have read it, some people haven't. I am legitimately interested in what Ibram X Kendi has to say about Uncle Tom's Cabin. I don't know what he's going to say. I mean, is he going to say it was a racist book? Because like people like him oftentimes will point to parts in Uncle Tom's Cabin that might be interpreted today as racist, but back then when it was written was like, it was a different world back then. So let's see what he's going to say. Looks like a lot of you have not read it, or if you have read it, it was like a long time ago. Fair enough.
But I'll let you go first. Talk about how you handle Harriet Beecher Stowe and that book.
So
Called Uncle Tom's Cabin, in case you
Yes.
know that book.
So I think many of the books and periods were, to a certain extent, a revelation for me. And I think researching the circumstances and the intellectual influence of her book is still sort of eye-popping for me, like even to this day.
It's all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, it was
cultural influences all over the world.
Yeah, when you think of the 19th century, you had the Bible, then Uncle Tom's Cabin in terms of bestsellers. I mean, but two, I think
And
first,
P.T. Barnum, he was up there too.
Yes. So has anybody heard the concept that Black people have soul? I'm sure you're like, yes. So that concept that Black people have soul stemmed, I argue, in this text from Uncle Tom's Cabin. Uncle Tom's Cabin made the case that Black people are more predisposed to Christianity and than white people were. But not only that, that's because one of the reasons why Black people were predisposed to Christianity was because they were predisposed to servility or to being dependent or to being slaves. So of course the pro-slavery argument that, yeah, I mean, slavery is good for Black people, like they're sort of predisposed to this. She actually met Americans where they were, believing that, and then made the case that, so this idea actually makes them predisposed to Christianity.
Well, let's let him continue that in a second. I just want to acknowledge Savritz's super chat. The catalyst for the guilt all nations are feeling was seeded centuries ago and something that doesn't currently exist. It's the equivalent of a placebo. Yeah, that's exactly right. So what Savritz is saying is that what we are experiencing that is causing us guilt today, it's not real. It existed a long time ago, but today it's not real, but we're making it real because the belief that something is real makes it real. I agree, Savritz. And then Akshay says, capitalism does operate best in Judeo-Christian society. Judaism gave birth to the idea of self-determination. Christianity gave birth to the idea of individualism. Key components of capitalism. Nah, bro, I'm sorry. I gotta, no. The idea of individualism was alive and well way before Christianity. I'm sorry. I need to fundamentally dispute that. I do not agree. Individualism, self-determination, those were teachings that were way before Christianity. Way before.
In contrast, white people, she argued, who are predisposed to freedom and ruling are therefore not predisposed to Christianity. And so the way white America can essentially become more Christian and do away with this sort of character trait was through liberating Black people. Everybody sort of get that. I mean, it was a very powerful sort of statement. Like, you know, you can get closer to God, white America, by becoming abolitionists. I mean, that was essentially the argument.
I just want to thank Mary on Rockfin for sending in a $5 tip. Thank you, Mary. You've always been such a great supporter on my Rockfin channel. Mary on Rockfin. And by the way, guys, I do stream most of the time when I stream, I'm streaming not only on YouTube, but I have an Odyssey channel. I have a Rockfin channel, and I have a Rumble channel. I usually also stream on Gitter. I'm usually streaming on Facebook, but please make sure you are subscribed on my alternative platforms. Again, Odyssey, Rockfin, and Rumble. Please make sure you're on at least one of those alternative platforms, just in case something ever happens. But Mary on Rockfin with the $5 tip asks, why do they use whiteness for capitalism? Other cultures in Asia and Africa also use capitalist principles. May have missed your answer if you discussed previously. So this is something I've discussed multiple times. And Mary, I would recommend that you check out my Substack because I have multiple articles on my Substack that deal with this question. The reason they use whiteness for capitalism is because it's essentially a way to use race as a weapon to create a class war. So the reason they use whiteness for capitalism is because they want to pit white people against Black people to create some sort of race war, because while we're all fighting each other, they're winning. So pitting people, and this is the basis of critical race theory, right? It's about using race to say some people are more oppressed than others. It's applying Marxist principles to race. Because when they do that, they're able to gain more power. Fighting between people because they're trying to drum up a race war is going to destabilize the system. If they can convince people that racism is to blame for all of the hardships in society, they're going to make an attack on capitalism, because they're going to say, you know what's really to blame for all your problems is capitalism. That's really what the real problem is. Capitalism is all about lifting up white people and pushing down brown people. Capitalism is what slavery was built on. Slavery would not have existed if it wasn't for capitalism. Therefore, capitalism is the biggest problem that you have in your life. And they're going to use that to try to initiate a Marxist revolution, which they're going to blame on race, but isn't actually caused as a result of race. So it's one of the easiest things they can use to kind of gin up a race war, essentially, would be my answer. I might have to think about that a little bit more cohesively, Mary, but I would refer you to my Substack where I do talk about this on a fairly regular basis. But I hope that makes sense, and let me know in the chat if you would like more information.
And she embedded it in unforgettable characters.
Oh, precisely.
Not just the ideas, but the characters.
And of course, she, in order to make that case, she had to make Black people these hyper-religious beings that had soul and nobody else had it, right? And then that positive construct, of course, like many racial constructs, that were actually denigrating to Black people sort of started hugging it, like notions that Black people are better and more athletic. I mean, we can go down the list. And of course, that's transferred to this day. Another quick influence of that text was this idea that the races would complement each other. So you had the dependent African and the independent European. And what we needed to do was sort of, instead of imagining one is superior to the other and creating this sort of dividing ideal of race, we need to create the unifying ideal of race and bring these two constructs together. I'm using terminology that W.B. Du Bois used in The Souls of Black Folk. So it's hard, it was just fascinating to me how Du Bois, coming up in New England,
Which is the fourth part of the book. That's Du Bois.
Yes.
Go. Du Bois is number 4.
he, of course, like many people in New England, his ideas about race were largely dominated and molded through these constructions that Harriet Beecher Stowe laid out in Uncle Tom's Cabin.
He had some trouble overcoming the 19th century in which he was born.
Exactly.
And raised and educated.
Yeah, and because people typically, I mean, if you read sort of Stories of Black Folk in concert with Uncle Tom's Cabin, I mean, I think you can see those sort of connections. I try to flesh those out in the book, that he literally talked about race as a biological construct, that each race had its own destiny, that you had the sort of hard European and the soft African, as he made the case in his graduation speech from Harvard. And so, you know, these were ideas that he took from Uncle Tom's Cabin.
And he's hardly alone.
Oh,
in this
no.
Late 19th, early 20th century era, among Black thinkers, white thinkers, there are all kinds of variations of this, but right up to the Harlem Renaissance.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
Hang on, I want to just take Yasmin's question. Did you ever read the Moynihan Report? I have not, Yasmin. What is that about? Let us know.
especially in the Harlem Renaissance. Okay, the fifth part, Angela Davis.
Fucking
Why'd you
Angela
choose
Davis.
Angela Davis?
So
Angela Davis is a terrorist. I'm sorry. Like, to like even okay, let's just let Ibram talk, I suppose. Why did he pick Angela Davis?
again, I think her public career. So Du Bois dies on the eve of the March on Washington. Of course, Angela Davis becomes a public figure when Black Power sort of explodes onto the American scene. And of course, has remained a public figure since 1969.
Angela Davis is a legit Marxist. Yes, is a Black woman feminist. Yes, she is, Yasmin. We watched Angela Davis on Socialism Saturday. She's a freaking Marxist. Come on.
That was critical. Another aspect of Angela Davis is she has been at the forefront of an issue that we have now begun to talk about in the last 10 years, which of course is the carceral state, which of course is mass incarceration. This is something she's been talking about in fighting against since the 1960s. Another reason I chose Angela Davis is because I wanted to have at least one character who steadily articulated anti-racist ideas throughout her lifetime.
Who
and
sustained it throughout, yeah.
precisely. And someone who, unlike the previous four characters and many other people articulated or sort of described in the book, was constantly defending the most denigrated and vulnerable group, Black racial group, whether you're talking about incarcerated people, whether you're talking about Black single mothers. I mean, she was typically at the forefront of defending these people before it was fashionable.
Mm. Wow, okay, there you got the 5 parts of the book. I find that move fascinating, of kind of hanging an entire era, even a century, on a person and then going from there. But that is kind of what we do with intellectual history. We need a person first. And yeah, anyway. Also, I want to say, you were trained as a journalist too.
Yes.
And it shows in the writing, folks. You're very good at setting scenes, very good at opening narratives that are not yet about the ideas. The ideas are coming in later. Back to the writing, just for a moment.
Something's happening in New Haven.
How did you think about that as a writer? I mean, you have...
Guys, if you've never been to New Haven, Connecticut, which is where Yale is, it is not the safest place to be in the world. And so the fact that we keep hearing sirens in this video is just like the cherry on top of this entire experience.
Have a narrative opening to every chapter in the book. Sometimes it's biographical, sometimes it's not. But that's writerly. You're not just talking about ideas here. That's writerly, and that's very conscious for you, I think.
Well, I think the reason actually why I chose the 5 characters is the same reason why I tried to create these scenes, and that is I want to make the book accessible.
Fair enough.
And as you would imagine, I know if somebody was to tell me, hey, you should read this 500-page book on intellectual history, I'm gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna. You know, anybody who's read intellectual history knows, I mean, it's hard to read those types of books.
From St. Paul to Darwin in 500 pages.
Yes. And so, but I think intellectual histories are critical, books, because really they show the transformation of ideas and concepts over time, and even show when ideas that we hold or that are dominant in our era, when they sort of emerged and the context in which they emerged. But it's so I wanted to figure out a way to, of course, write an intellectual history that was accessible as possible, for people, because I would imagine that generally these types of books are not accessible. And the way that I did that was I probably added a few 100 pages of scenes and other types of character development to sort of allow the reader to actually enjoy what they're reading on some level.
Yeah, especially on a unhappy subject. Let's face it. Yeah, because you're writing about real people, and they are very real. Can we go back and dive down a little bit before we go to Q&A on just the abolition?
Q&A is always the best.
A moment. I mean, the American...
For those of you who are either new to Happy Hour and or Socialism Saturday, Q&A is always the part where they say the most insane stuff, because it's the unrehearsed version, essentially. And so we always watch the Q&A. It always gives us the best information. But guys, if you are enjoying Happy Hour so far, where we're showing you what Ibram X Kendi says when he doesn't think any of us are listening, please make sure you mount that like button. We do Happy Hour every single Friday at 5 p.m. on my channel, and this is a time where we watch the woke say whatever they want to say in their long form, and a lot of times they end up incriminating themselves. So we're about 40 minutes into this presentation. We have about 50 minutes left to go, 50. So they're going to have a nice long Q&A. So make sure you grab your beer. I'm almost done my green beer, sadly, but I have other beer, so it's okay. Make sure you grab your Happy Hour beer. Happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone. Mount that like button for me. Please subscribe to the channel if you have not already. Let's continue.
An abolitionist, which we just discussed in my graduate seminar 1 hour ago.
See, Fish Addict, we have to be friends, because if you're going to move to New Hampshire, we have to be friends. Absolutely. I live in a very liberal town, and the white guy reminds me of every older guy in town meeting the post office. Oh, isn't that the truth? And we have those in New Hampshire too. Make no mistake, we do. But it's all good. Oh, hang on. Hit the wrong thing. There we go.
We were reading Manisha Sinha's book.
Oh, yeah.
And a few other things. Here you have the prototypical American reform movement.
This beer is really alcoholic, by the way.
Anti-whatever.
I'm just a little bit buzzed.
Future.
I can't be held responsible for anything else I say on this stream.
Women's rights, gay rights, environmentalism. I mean, all movements after the abolitionists owe something to this first great
I
movement.
say anything stupid for the rest of the night, you guys all have to forgive me.
Modernity and the press and all the rest. But you dive into them a little differently. You use Garrison as the hook, who was a genuine radical by anyone's definition, and a professional radical. But you are trying to show us that this problem of racism and anti-racism, it seems to me, and you correct me, you're trying to show us that this isn't just dividing people on who's either right or wrong, or even good or evil. It's ideas they don't even know they have sometimes. It's ideas that become part of a culture, part of a consciousness, part of a set of habits of mind, some of which are broken and beaten and maybe overcome, although you're suspicious of overcoming racism at all at times, and some of which cannot be overcome. Talk a little bit about how you broke the abolitionists down for us. Because I can see you've had critics who have said, well, wait a minute now. These people led a crusade that helped destroy slavery. Give them some credit. Well, you do give them credit. But talk about how you went at the abolitionists, not after, at the abolitionists.
So, I think you explained it.
No, I didn't explain it. No. You got 100 pages on the abolitionists, man.
I think to sort of recast one of the things that you stated, I found very early on in my research that there were racist ideas within conservative, liberal, and radical thought. That's the first sort of thing. And clearly, when we think of radical thought, and even for many people, liberal thought, people imagine that there are not racist ideas there. Well, I argue and I show how within these three intellectual traditions, you have ideas suggesting that there's something inferior about a particular racial group, but just coming from
hang on. I want to acknowledge this chat. Sinbad says, yay, I caught alive. Happy St. Patrick's Day. Carlin in chat. Happy St. Patrick's Day, Sinbad, with what remains of my green beer. I live in a conservative southern town and I'm a libertarian, but I absolutely adore you. I appreciate that so much, Sinbad. I'm so glad you caught alive for the day, and I hope you're having a wonderful St. Patrick's Day. Oh, I'm definitely drinking a second beer. I'm thinking the Napoleon ice cream beer that I have. We'll have to see. Hang on. Let's keep going.
Different perspectives. In other words, instead of while conservative, So the other aspect of it is I decided very deliberately to write a history of racist ideas as opposed to racist.
They haven't even talked about the history of racist ideas.
And when you talk about ideas, and I think I could probably speak for everyone in here as well as myself. When you talk about ideas.
Hang on, we got a chat coming in. Kaiwan, who is a little troublemaker in my chat, but it's okay, Kaiwan. What parts of New Hampshire is libertarian? What neighborhoods? All of it. That's the truth of it. New Hampshire is the libertarian homeland. New Hampshire has more libertarian state reps than any other state in the country. They may be registered as Republicans, but don't let it fool you. They're libertarians that are registered as Republicans. Some of them are registered as Democrats just to mix it up, but they do that to get elected. But they are a libertarian at the end of the day. So there are libertarians all over the state of New Hampshire. If you want to come visit New Hampshire, contact the Free State Project. The Free State Project will let you know about the different areas of New Hampshire, what areas you might be more inclined to, where the libertarian clubhouses are. See, Kurt's here. Kurt's a Free Stater. Well, maybe not the college dorms of Keene. Well, no, certainly not Kirk, but there are, of course, libertarians in Keene. But like, if you want to come visit New Hampshire, contact the Free State Project. They will let you know about the different parts of New Hampshire. Come to Pork Fest. Pork Fest is going to be like the best way to get introduced to this stuff in New Hampshire, I think. But there are all sorts of libertarian clubhouses. There are libertarian hangouts. Just contact them. They'll let you know what's up. I want to move to New Hampshire. I've been looking at it the last 2 years. You definitely should. You definitely should. Kaiwan is from France, and I got confused. That's all good. Just New Hampshire's a small state. You can drive from one part to the other in like, a couple of hours. And so don't worry about it. Are we diverse in terms of like skin color? No, it's very white. Are we diverse in terms of political ideology? Oh, yeah. Don't believe anyone who tells you that New Hampshire is a blue state. New Hampshire is not a blue state. Trendlin says, can I come work for you so I can move to New Hampshire? I don't have any positions open, Trendlin. I work for myself. I don't have any employees because I don't want that type of responsibility. But I'm sure we can find some sort of libertarian to hire you in New Hampshire. Contact the Free State Project, Trendlin. They'll hook you up. We'll introduce you around. Come to Pork Fest. Come meet some folks. It'll all be good. Anyway, let's keep going, guys. Is it a purple state? No, I wouldn't even say that. It's New Hampshire is weird because New Hampshire has a lot of libertarians who live here. And what you need to understand about libertarians is that they don't necessarily support Republicans. A lot of Republicans are confused about this. Republicans are not guaranteed libertarian support, especially when it comes to going to DC, because libertarians don't actually care. Libertarians in New Hampshire, specifically, don't actually care who goes to DC, because the libertarians in New Hampshire want to secede from the Union. So they don't care who goes to DC. Whether Democrat or Republican makes no difference. But if you look at the state level policy, and the state level activism, we are the #1 free state in the country. We are more free and liberty oriented than Florida. We are way more free and liberty oriented than Texas. If you're looking for the most liberty state to move to, you need to contact the Free State Project and seriously consider New Hampshire, because we are actually ranked as a more free state than Florida, regardless of what you might hear on Twitter. All right, let's keep going.
You're talking about a mind of contradictions, quite possibly. And so then it allows me as an historian to account for contradictions.
We do have constitutional carry. That is very true.
Because I can, as you saw, I could
take a speech,
and at the beginning of the speech, Garrison would say the most anti-racist sort of ideas, making a case for why there should be immediate emancipation. But then when he starts talking about the harm of slavery and that they've made Black people into brutes, and he's shocked that Douglas can write this well.
Hang on, I promise this will be the last thing I say about New Hampshire. I'm always shilling. GR says, but property taxes are so high in New Hampshire. I'm still thinking about moving there. So property taxes are high. Yes, we are working on that. However, there's no income tax and there's also no sales tax. So your tax burden in New Hampshire, your overall tax burden, will actually be lower than almost any other state. But the property taxes are high, and that scares a lot of people away. But we are working on that. That is a problem. We understand it's a problem. But you also have to understand you're not going to be paying income tax, which is huge. You're also not going to be paying sales tax. Also, like the no estate tax, exactly. You're also going to they recently lowered like the room and beverage tax, I think. So there's all sorts of taxes that are really, really low or non-existent that definitely counterbalance the property tax. I actually don't think my property tax is that bad. I'm not that upset about it. But we are working on it. We are aware of the problem, but there are other offsets of that.
well, you know, like those types of ideas. Now he's articulating racist ideas. So, you know, you can say that he's articulating both because you're identifying one as one and the other as the other. And so that's why I was.
And both are different kinds of weapons.
No sales
Precisely.
tax.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that I wanted to also show is racist ideas have, in fact, moved people.
We do have beaches. We have Hampton Beach, the bustling metropolis that is Hampton Beach. We've got like 8 miles of coastline. And also, you can drive to Massachusetts. You can, if you want to go to Massachusetts, I don't know. I'm still going to keep talking about New Hampshire. I'm sorry. It's the beer. You can go to Massachusetts. You can go to Maine. Everything is within driving distance. So yeah, we got some beaches. They're cold. I'm not going to lie. They're really effing cold. But, you know, we do have them. We have whale watches. You can drive to a whale watch. Oh, 16 miles. I apologize, Kurt. We don't have 8 miles of coastline. We have 16 miles of coastline. But Hampton Beach is legitimately really fun. I actually like it there. And you're just a drive away from Maine, too. You'll get like the best lobsters in Maine ever. Whale watches are awesome, okay? If you've never been on a whale watch, I didn't want to go on a whale watch. And then Victor was like, why don't we go on a whale watch, Carl? And I was like, really? He's like, yes, I want to go on a whale watch. And we went on a whale watch and it was fun. And it was awesome. And we got to see whales and it was really cool. I recommend it.
For the good, but it usually ended up in the long run for the bad. So to give an example, the belief that slavery was making Black people into brutes was great to get people to oppose slavery. But then when slavery was over, these same people were saying, okay, we need to civilize and develop them. They're not ready, as Garrison stated, for their civil rights. So you see how it operates well in one arena and operates negatively in another. And I wanted to also sort of show that as well.
Okay. You do a very interesting job too. Good job, not just interesting, with this whole phenomenon that went on for decades and decades of colonization. A lot of who become abolitionists cut their teeth as Garrison cut his teeth as a colonizationist. Talk about that a little bit, because that's an idea. Removal, it never goes away in the 19th century. And to a degree, it has its revivals throughout the 20th and even now.
Well, again, I think
as a solution somehow.
Yeah, I think that clearly writing a history of racial ideas, the colonization movement was the most powerful and well-financed reform movement, even more so than abolition, of the 19th century. And for those of you who aren't familiar with this movement, these were, of course, there were many different strands, but generally speaking, colonizationists made the case that we should free Black people and then basically send them back to Africa or send them to Haiti or send them somewhere other than here, because there's just no way that the racial groups can get along. And that argument was first made in a popular way by Thomas Jefferson. And so Thomas Jefferson was really the pioneer of colonizationist thought.
Really,
and it was revived by
Thomas Jefferson, who purposefully wrote into the Declaration of Independence lines that were directly designed to get rid of slavery, is the pioneer of colonization. All right, Ibram. Well, whatever. I'm more focused on my beer, so I'm not going to argue with you for right this second. But what I will say is I'm about to open a beer called Neapolitan Squeeze, which I've been looking forward to, which is a sour ale with strawberry, cocoa, vanilla, and lactose. It's like Neapolitan ice cream. Let's see. And it's going to mix with the green, so it might be a little weird, but we're just going to go with it. We're just going to see how it goes. Yep, brown. I knew it was going to be brown because of the cocoa. I knew it. Looks ugly. I'm not licking the cup bot. Looks ugly. Let's see how it tastes. It smells good. Ooh, it tastes very strawberry. Huh. Going to Monticello in a few weeks. That'll be fun. Let us know how that goes.
And became very prominent by the 1820s, and it really became the premier way in which people thought that they were alleviating slavery. So we'll do gradual abolition, and as we're emancipating these Black people, we'll send them back. And
hang on, Kurt's coming in with the fun fact. I didn't know this, Kurt, but it was Lincoln who established Liberia specifically for returning freed slaves to Africa. I had no idea about that. How fascinating.
And it was a theory or an idea.
That's where Abraham Lincoln began.
Yeah, I was just about to, I mean, Abraham Lincoln tried early in his presidency to figure out a way to basically get rid of Black people. Was even angry when a group of Black men came to the White House and he said, for the best of the country, you should just voluntarily leave. And they were like, no. And he was like, you're not patriotic. And they were like, no.
Really?
But the whole while was
Lincoln
trying to
had a bad day that.
Yeah. But eventually, clearly, it's very difficult to figure out a way to get rid of 2 million people in 1860s, right? You know, and even Jefferson realized you could put people on boats, but new people are being born, and so it's certainly probably just going to have to deal with these people. But this idea was very important, and even the whole support for Black people getting 40 acres and a mule, some of that support came from people articulating what they called internal colonization. In other words, we should set off a part of America for Black people to sort of live. Now, Black people were actually like, that's fine with us. So yeah, I mean, it was a very important, and I wanted to sort of show its many strands.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you one more, I think, important question, and then we are going to open this up. Because at your center, the Anti-Racist Research and Policy Center, you're, as I understand it, and you should explain it, you're developing a policy center. And part of your whole thrust is that racism itself may or may not be conquerable, but new policies can change the world, or policies may change people faster than you can change people by ideas, by challenging their ideas. So you've created, and you argue at the end of Stamped, that it's the policies that have to be changed, revolutionized, worked on, more so than changing people's minds. That's an interesting position to take in a center about racism and anti-racism, although anti-racism is in the title of your center, not racism. But talk about that. Why that choice, and how were you doing that?
Sure. So that came out of Stamped from the beginning. I went into this book believing, as I'm sure many people do, that the source of racist ideas, in other words, the people who were producing these ideas were producing them because they hated Black people, or they just did not know Black people. They were ignorant. So either ignorance or hate. And I should say that really this book was a history of the producers of racist ideas. I was very deliberate in focusing on people who were creating and producing ideas, and really trying to understand and ask the question, okay, why were they producing these ideas at this time? Why did Jefferson make the case in 1785 that we should promote colonization?
I agree with this.
And
Kendi is completely wrong about Jefferson.
And I didn't
completely wrong.
Find this, that many of these producers were producing these ideas were some of the most brilliant, by all accounts, American minds. And so these were, whether you're talking about Jefferson, whether you're talking about even John C. Calhoun, whether you're talking about many of these figures were universally credited with being incredible thinkers, right? And so then that conflicts with this notion that these people were just ignorant, right? You also had people like Jefferson, who secretly was not hating Black people. Y'all know what I'm talking about? And so how do you sort of account for this? And then I also saw So ultimately, I mean, because I want to get to questions, what I found was that instead of these ideas coming out of ignorance and hate, they were actually coming out of a need to justify racist policies that typically benefited these people. And so I found racist policies being instituted and then benefiting people, and then those policies leading to racial inequity. And then there's only two ways to explain racial inequity. Either there's something wrong with people or policy, and then them saying, no, it's not our policies, it's those inferior people. And then people consuming those ideas. So I distinguish between the producers and the consumers of racist ideas, and then people becoming ignorant and hateful. And so what that means ultimately is instead of racist ideas leading to racist policies have led to racist ideas. And so if we really want to eliminate racism, and if you think of racism as this sort of marriage of racist ideas and policies, it's probably better to focus on eliminating the policies than on the ideas.
It's actually a fascinating approach. I mean, we don't stop and think too often that slavery was a policy with a deep legal, political, structural base to it. It was a policy. So were a lot of other things. I'm dying to ask you how you think about the idea of human progress, but maybe someone out there will. So you don't have to. So it's time for questions. We have 2 microphones up here. Could we have someone just lift them and carry them around and hand them up the aisle?
Oh, good. Q&A.
Start right here in the front.
Excellent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed the book. Beautiful, fascinating. I had to write this down because in the first chapter you described the problem in the first place, or part of the problem. In the sense you started that Aristotle concocted a climate theory to justify Greek superiority, and that it was in turn adopted by the Romans. But I want to know, was Francis Bernier and other European writers knowingly denying their own native tribal identities that were impaled by Roman conquest? And then when in turn they subjugated other people, did the same and expected them to follow Constantine's edicts as true as they did.
So of course I can't say definitively, what he knew or didn't know or what he was doing, but I mean, clearly Francois Bernier, who scholars point to as really the first major racial classifier. So I think it was in 1685, he sort of classified the white race, the black race, the Asian race. And that sort of classification was the classification that Carl Linnaeus leaned on in 1735 to further classify the races, a classification that became dominant during the Enlightenment era. So I'm not sure, but what I do know is clearly, if you look at Europe, just like you look at any other place or continent around the world, you see many different ethnicities, tribes, however you want to describe it, and you see many differences, right, in not only cultural, but even the way people look within Europe. And so if you are basically classifying all of these people as one people, then you're fundamentally denying that. So I can't say it based on anything he said, but based on his ideas, I could probably make that case.
Next. Yes, sir.
How you doing, Professor Kendi? I know you're at American University, and
hang on. I want to get this super chat from Sean. Sean, thank you for the super chat. Sneaky Marxist. Kendi basically said that society determines how individuals act, excluding their own beliefs. Therefore, give me control of society. Yeah, Kendi is so sneaky. And I saw someone else comment too, like, he's being so even-keeled in this. I'm a little surprised, if I'm honest about it. I hope the Q&A will be more eventful. But Kendi knows how to play this game. Kendi knows how to not answer a question that he does not want to answer. He knows how to twist things. You always got to be really, really careful. But thank you, Sean. I appreciate it.
I used to live in Washington, D.C. Howard University. I know your family. So, with being in Washington, D.C., how do these ideologies that you speak of flow into things like gentrification, which I know you see on a regular basis? I know most recently it closed.
It's asking about gentrification.
And metropolitan, so formerly African-American institutions are being shut down. We know the people have already been moved out, over the past 20 years, but now even institutions that people who come into Washington to visit are being closed down. So what ideologies, based on this, assimilationist, segregationist, flow into that gentrification that we see in places like Washington?
So the question, just in case people couldn't hear it if they're not wearing headphones, is what ideologies lead into gentrification, essentially? Is Kendi a narcissist? I don't know if he is. I don't, maybe, but I'm not getting that vibe from him necessarily, to be honest. You can be a bad person and not be a legitimate narcissist. So I'm not sure yet, but I would say no at this point.
So you just used the word gentrification in DC. It's boiling right now. And so I'm happy to be talking about it here as opposed to there. But one thing I'll say, to be very quick, is one type of racist idea that I did not really chronicle as much in Stand from the Beginning, that I have a whole chapter on in text that I'm writing now, is what I'm loosely calling space racism. And for those of you who are familiar with the Brown v. Board of Education decision, this was a decision that essentially stated that segregated schools, meaning colored schools, are having a detrimental effect on colored children. There was not a similar rationale by the court that white schools were having a detrimental effect on white children. And so
how are you defining detrimental effect? He's not going to give us a definition, of course. No, Fish Addict, I would not say that he has borderline. I would not agree with that at all. Guys, hang on. Not everyone that you dislike has a personality disorder. Just because you don't like someone, just because you don't agree with them, does not mean they have a personality disorder. In fact, people who are obsessed with calling everyone they disagree with as having a personality disorder most often have that personality disorder themselves. So just chew on that for a little bit.
Emerged out of this was this idea of segregated spaces being majority people of color and integrated spaces being spaces where it's majority white, and segregated spaces being inferior, and these, quote, integrated spaces being superior. And so I'm sure you can imagine sort of how those constructs play out in the construct of gentrification. And you mentioned the church that was sort of taken over. Well, some integrationists would argue that now it's going to be made better because it's no longer a segregated church.
Next. Back here. Oh, back row. Yes. Please.
Thank you for your talk, Professor Kendi. Big fan of your work. I've read both of your books.
I can barely hear the question.
I guess there's two questions I have. One is, given how you call out the intellectual canon of most academic disciplines, I'm curious.
I didn't do that on purpose. It just happened.
People outside of history, I guess, have responded to your questioning some of the legitimacy of some of those people. So I guess
so the first question he asked is roughly like, Ibram, you have called out multiple academic disciplines for like not being as good as yours. How did they respond to that?
One question. And then the second question I'm asking because I have read Black Campus Movement is when I hear you say there's a need for policy, right? There's a need for policy to rectify where we are. If someone had not read Black Campus Movement, they might think of you literally just saying, oh, like you just need to go propose this legislation, propose this initiative, But when I hear you say that, what I think of is, not just something where it's about what's happening with legal actors, but it's about kind of the cultural movement in tandem with the development of a particular, initiative. But what I'm curious is that what you're actually saying? Because I think.
So the second question seems to be, Ibram, you have advocated for policies to be implemented based on your work to be anti-racist, but don't you actually think it's more of a cultural movement than it is a policy movement?
In thinking about, if someone were to come up with a particular policy tomorrow, but we're not to also address like the remnants of like segregationist or assimilationist rhetoric that kind of is already spinning out in the world, that policy might not go far. So I guess I was curious more if you could talk about, like, when you talk about policy development, you talk about policy implementation, like what are the different spheres that you're thinking of?
Sure. So in terms of the first question, there's primarily been radio silence. And in terms of, so I haven't heard from people trying to defend the originators of their disciplines. And I mean, we could certainly debate the reasons why.
All right, guys, we have about a half an hour left of this presentation. I really need to go to the bathroom. I'm sorry, I don't normally do this, but here's what I'm gonna do. I've had some beer. I need to go, do what I need to do. I'm gonna play the video full screen, and what I need you guys to do is pay close attention, and I need you to tell me what I missed while I was gone. I'm gonna be back super quick. I'm super quick about it, but keep on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're celebrating a pee break. Exactly. Exactly. It's the beer. All right, guys, but please let me know if I miss anything, and I will be back extremely quickly.
But I just wanted sort of to answer that question directly. I think in terms of and I should also add, so the first write of the text was much, much longer, and I actually had to cut out a lot of the history of scientific racism, particularly in the founding of disciplines, for a number of different, well, I should say it was cut out. And so maybe if I would have had more and I would have actually sort of really documented how many of the founders of almost every American discipline was a segregationist, not even assimilationist, I think there probably would have been more pushback from those who, but many of these founders aren't actually taught as founders, which is another issue. And so when you think about founders, I'm thinking about literally the institutional founders, like who created the first journals, who were the first president of the organizations. I mean, these were the people who founded the first departments, were the first major professors. Typically, most of these disciplines aren't looking at these people as founders. They're looking at people who they enjoy their ideas more. The second question, very quickly, so I think this is something that I certainly struggle with, because one of the reasons why I use the term policy is because I feel like it's all encompassing. But at the same time, I think
I'm back.
when some people think
Told
about
you, be
policy,
quick.
as you stated, they think of in the way you sort of described. I think when I think of policy, I should say that I define a racist policy as any policy that leads to racial inequity. It's very simple. And anti-racist policies,
I told you,
as any policies that lead to racial equity.
So this is what I talked about at the beginning. How he's talking about this is if your policy leads to inequity at all, then you are a racist. Whereas he's saying that if people think that white people are superior to black people, that's not a racist policy. That's a segregationist policy. Whereas if capitalism Exactly. Leads to inequities between Black people and white people. That means that capitalism is a racist policy. I did too, Kino. I ran them under the water and real quick, but I did. Relax.
So it's very sort of simple. So,
Let's
I mean,
fight
you
that.
can look at any policy, whether it's an emission policy, whether it's a hiring policy, and sort of see whether it's causing racial inequity but not only in terms of those types of policy. I mean, we have all unofficial policies in our homes, in our communities, in our social spaces. And so really, I want people to think as broadly as possible, because really groups of people are governed by policies that are written and unwritten, legal and illegal.
Yes, back here in the blue shirt, and then we'll come up in the middle right here.
Thank you so much for the talk. While we're still on the policy part, coming from a development field, I find that most of the times we can get the policy right. That's easy to get, but to change people's attitude is always the hardest thing. And I'm wondering.
There are not complexities, though, because the ideas that you brought up are literally never mentioned. In 2 straight years of happy hour, watching this stuff at least once a week, sometimes more than once a week, the ideas you brought up are never mentioned. That means you're making them up. I understand that you have some sort of emotional connection to those ideas being involved because you made them up, probably because you heard about them from other influencers. But what I'm telling you is that those ideas are literally never mentioned. Not by the people you're saying care about them. And when people care about ideas, they bring them up. They talk about them by name. It is why capitalism is mentioned in quite literally every single happy hour we do. Because when you care about something, you talk about it. If you don't care about it, you don't talk about it. Do you know who cares about Western Enlightenment values and Christianity? The conservative right. That's who's talking about those ideas. It's not these people. You think those ideas are existing in this ideology because you have heard about it by influencers on the conservative right. You are not hearing about it from these people.
As much as I would like to see and racist policies put in place, I wonder how you think about people's attitudes. Do you think policy can as well influence that and change it for the long run, and how so? Thank you.
So again, I try to answer these questions, not necessarily based in our own moment, but I try to look at it from an historical perspective. And probably the most obvious example is in recent history is the relationship between the policy and the idea of interracial marriage. And so when interracial marriage.
Well, you're hearing it from someone. You're not hearing it from the woke left. I'm telling you this. You are not hearing those ideas from the woke left. The woke left never talks about Enlightenment values. Never. Never. If you disagree with me, name one single presentation that the woke left has talked about Enlightenment values. Name one. That's all I need is one. Because in 2 years of watching these long form presentations, I have quite literally never heard them talk about it. I have extremely rarely heard them talk about Christianity. And when they're talking about Christianity, they believe that Christianity is on their side. They're not talking about it adversarially. They're talking about it as people who support them. The only thing that they consistently bring up over and over and over and over again in 90+ % of the presentations is capitalism. So if you're hearing other things that are influencing your thought process, which are probably coming from conservative influencers, then you need to name them, honestly. Because if they're not talking about them, then they don't care about them. People talk about ideas they care about. They do not talk about ideas they do not care about. The falsehood that these people are attacking Enlightenment values was perpetrated by the IDW, the intellectual dark web. Who made up the intellectual dark web? Mostly conservative effing influencers, with a couple liberals sprinkled in there just for color, but it was mostly conservative effing influencers. Let's be honest about that.
Became constitutional. A large segment of Americans was against interracial marriage in 1967. What has happened since then? And of course, there was a massive reaction to that from those people who didn't like it. But what's happened since then? You've had, at least according to polls, people becoming more and more accepting over the last 50 years of interracial marriage. Now, we could have been like, okay, let's actually convince people that this is okay. But I think it would have taken much longer. And so I actually think that, and even when we look at slavery, so when you look at attitudes about slavery in 1890 versus in 1850, people are more actually likely in 1890, and this is more anecdotal because there's no real polling. It seems to me that people were more of the belief that Black people were not fit fundamentally for slavery in 1890 than they were in 1850. And so this is, and I tried to talk a little bit about this in Stand from the beginning.
Nope, this is not true. They attack capitalism by name in almost every presentation they do. It is not true at all that they will not attack capitalism by name. They name capitalism as an enemy that needs to be abolished in almost every single presentation they do. Not 100%, but over 90%.
But one thing we should understand as it relates to ideas. So these ideas that people have, this isn't necessarily a static sort of thing. What's happening, and you have people producing the ideas constantly to make people believe that there's something wrong with a particular racial group. And we see this, of course, from people in Washington, D.C. pretty regularly, right? And they have a specific political or economic or even cultural interest in doing so. And so one analogy that I like to use is that you could, like, let's say if somebody is shooting you with a hose of racist ideas, you could certainly focus on drying that person off, or you could do what? Turn off the hose. And if the policy and the need to justify the policy, I need to justify voter ID laws with this idea of voter fraud, right? If you eliminate the policy, you're essentially turning off the hose. And then you can simultaneously reduce the damage and then start to dry the person off.
But you still have to convince human beings to change the policy.
Oh, yeah, which is another, and that's largely came through struggle, as
this damn species we're part of. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I think my question is a little bit of a follow-up of that. You were citing at the beginning Abraham Lincoln saying that the country would either become pro-slavery or anti-slavery.
I cannot understand this person.
Really, slavery never went away. It just transformed into a different, pervasive way.
So she's saying that slavery never really went away. It just transformed into like a different thing.
Of slavery. So to some extent, it makes me think that racist ideas will never go away. They may just transform into something else.
So because slavery never went away, it just transformed into a different thing. She's asking if slavery will, or if racism will ever go away, or will it just transform into a different thing?
I don't know. So I guess my question is, and I am not a historian, but from the time I've been doing activism, something that I tend to realize is if there is something good we can get from the current administration is how it made very clear, very open, how pervasive racist ideas are still in the US and how prevalent they are in the policy. So I don't know if this is just a cynic way of trying to.
This person is talking about how prevalent racist ideas are in the US, specifically how prevalent they are in policy, which is, of course, Ibram X Kendi's thing. Ibram X Kendi is the guy who wants to create a whole department of anti-racism within the federal government. He literally called for this in 2020. So he is very much a policy guy. He wants to institutionalize anti-racism in federal policy.
See where things are going, but I kind of would like to hear your opinion about, do you think that we're going somewhere, that all that is happening right now to some extent may come to something positive at some point?
Are you looking for hope? Always a good idea. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's cool. So, I mean, I will say that you're absolutely correct in terms of what some scholars, have called slavery by another name, or journalists, or worse than slavery, in terms of the convict lease system, or certainly mass incarceration. But we should understand that that's still different than chattel slavery. And so
One
how
would
do
think,
we sort
yes,
of account
okay.
for literally chattel slavery ending, and 4 million people being freed or freeing themselves, but then a simultaneous installation of convict leasing, and then of course what we know what's happened in the last 50 years. How do we account for both things happening simultaneously? And what I argue, and I try to make the case in Stanford beginning, that, and I should also say that, as many of you know, young people and older people are arguing and have been arguing for a while about whether there's been progress, right? Anybody know what I'm talking about, right? And both have great arguments, right? And I think that both are actually correct. And so what has actually happened is you've had both racial progress and racist progress. And so I
really,
try to track
Ibram?
this dueling
Okay.
history. And you have activists who are constantly sort of breaking down racial barriers and breaking down or eliminating racist policies, but then those who are benefiting from those policies figuring out new ways to erect new ones, and typically they're more sophisticated than the policies they replace. So that's literally a progression, right? The policy becoming ever more sophisticated. And so I track that dueling history, I think, in Stanford from the beginning. And so really, we've had both racial and racist progress. And in terms of hope, I do think in order to believe, in order to bring about change, you have to believe it's possible. And I think
True.
all of the greatest activists in history believed in the possibilities of change. And so to me, I think from a philosophical perspective, despite everything that's happening, I think it's hard to truly bring about change and to do all of the hard things it takes if you don't even believe it's possible.
I've always loved that answer, both. Most people don't. I mean, we'd like to know it's that or that. But these historians are always kind of telling us it's both. And we don't like, Americans don't like both. They like their progress linear. Seriously, this is, there are some things unique about the way Americans think about it.
The Hollywood history.
Well, our history's supposed to be going somewhere. It's out there. There are other countries where they don't necessarily believe that. We're live streaming this, and I just got the signal that we have a good question on Facebook.
Yes, we do. We have a question from Latanya Autry. She asks, I'd love to hear Dr. Kendi address intersectionality. In her book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Angela Davis made a point about stressing anti-racism that is aligned with anti-sexism and anti-poverty. You could say something.
Sure. So I think in the prologue, I sort of cite and talk about Kimberly Crenshaw and her theory of intersectionality, because it's central to the definition of a racist idea. The whole notion of a racial group is the sort of recognition that Black people are a collection of intersectional sort of
The terrorist
racialized
feminists.
groups. And then in understanding that, you begin to see this history of gender racism, as it's been called,
Gender
queer racism, class
racism?
racism. What I'm
What the
talking about
fuck?
is sort of the intersection as relates to gender racism of sexist
Intersectionality.
and racist ideas. The sort of, as it relates to this notion that the sexist idea that women are weak, and the racist idea that Black women are not really women, intersect to create this idea of the strong Black woman that is inferior to the pinnacle of womanhood, which is the weak white woman.
What?
See how that sort of operates. And so then you have those two constructs, and it,
Did Ibram X Kendi literally just say that the strong Black woman is inferior to the weak white woman? Because that sounds pretty fucking racist to me. I would never say something like that. Why did Ibram X Kendi just say that? Could it be that Ibram X Kendi is a racist? Wow.
flips around as it relates to Black men and white men. So, you know, the real superior men are strong, right? Black men are not really men. And so those ideas intersect to create this
What are you
idea of a
talking about?
strong,
No one
superior
actually
white man
believes that.
superior to the weak Black man. And so these constructs of
Again, Ibram X Kendi is the one that is advancing racism here. No one actually believes the things that Ibram X Kendi is saying.
the strong Black masculine woman and the weak Black feminine man constantly sort of dominate throughout the history of racist ideas. And then you see the same thing as it relates to homosexuality, notions of homosexuals as hypersexual, notions of Black people as hypersexual, intersect to create notions that Black gays and lesbians are more hypersexual than Black heterosexuals and white gays and lesbians. So everybody see how that happens. So this is another reason why the book was a little bit longer, because I had to count. No, seriously, I had to account for all of these sort of intersectional groups and the ideas that have been created about them.
I think we have another question right back here. Or no, where am I? Oh, right here. Sorry. You have the mic.
Hi, thanks for coming and putting up with this instead of just saying, read the book. Appreciate it. I didn't read the book. Did you talk about affirmative action directly in the book?
So I talked about it in terms of the argument against affirmative action. I specifically, I think probably in the most length, I talk about the Bakke case. And I specifically...
It'll be really, I think affirmative action is going to get overturned by the Supreme Court. And it will be really interesting to hear what Ibram X Kendi thinks about affirmative action getting overturned by the Supreme Court.
Well, let me not give it away, but I make the case, and this I'll give you a teaser without giving it away, that Bakke should not have been the person who was on trial making the case that he was being discriminated against. That's another person or persons should have been on trial making the case that the current set of policies were discriminating against them. Anybody want to take a guess what policies I'm thinking about, talking about? So, as you know, the
Failed that quiz.
the Bakke case, and I guess the court and the majority decision creates this sort of division between race conscious and race neutral policies. Does anybody want to shout out a so-called race neutral policy? Anybody?
Public school.
I'm sorry?
Healthcare for all.
Well, in the case of MCATs, because of course Bakke was applying to medical school, is that a race neutral policy? Is that and so, I try to sort of discuss and show who created the construct of race neutral, even though the policy itself was creating racial inequity.
So standardized testing
Yes.
is,
And
the
that
table,
is
so.
precisely after I show who created standardized tests, eugenicists.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I don't know if you're on to me, but the reason I asked is because you spelled it out pretty clear that you felt like any ideology that holds a race superior or inferior are by definition racist.
Say that again?
Any ideology that holds one race superior or inferior is by definition racist.
Mhm.
So I was just trying to figure out, then if a policy is designed to specifically benefit Black people, is it most likely racist?
Oh, a subversive is in the crowd. Did you guys hear that? This kid, and I'm going to bet it's a white kid, it's a white guy, got up and was like, Ibram, you said that any policy that says one race is superior over another race is inherently racist. Does that mean that if a policy inherently prefers Black people over white people, does that make it racist? Let's see what Ibram says.
And a race-based deficit that needs to be fixed, and then how that, just chase it out. I'm just really actually curious, do you support affirmative action? No.
Sure. So I think when it comes to let's talk about discrimination. So there's actually discrimination.
He's not going to answer.
There's a racist and an anti-racist.
He's not going to answer. Watch.
And when people think of discrimination, they think about it as purely racist. But when you actually think about, there's actually two ways in which discrimination works. One form of discrimination creates equity. Another form of discrimination creates inequity.
What?
One form of discrimination.
Wait, what? I'm sorry. I think we may have just stumbled upon the golden nugget that we've been waiting for 2.5 hours. Ibram X Kendi just said, one form of discrimination creates equity. Did you all hear that? We're going to rewind. I'm going to clip this shit. One form of discrimination creates equity. He is acknowledging that in order to attain equity, you need to have discrimination. I got to rewind. We got to do it from the beginning. We'll go. That kid asking
of the argument.
Hang on, I want to get to the point where that kid is asking that question.
Specifically, I think probably in the most length
exactly,
I talk about the Baki case.
Exactly.
And I specifically, well, let me not give it away, but I make the case, and this I'll give you a teaser without giving it away, that Baki should not have been the person who was on trial making the case that he was being discriminated against. That's another person or persons should have been on trial making the case that the current set of policies were discriminating against them. Anybody want to take a guess what policies I'm thinking about, talking about? So, as you know, the
failed that quiz.
The sort of anybody
Public inferior are
creating racial inequity.
So standardized testing.
Yes.
Is
and that is
so.
Precisely after I show who created standardized tests, eugenicists.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I don't know if you're on to me, but the reason I asked is because you spelled it out pretty clear that you felt like any ideology that holds a race superior or inferior are by definition racist.
Say that again.
Any ideology that holds one race superior or inferior is by definition racist.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just trying to figure out, then if a policy is designed to specifically benefit Black people, is it most likely racist because it presumes some kind of race-based deficit that needs to be fixed? And then how that, just chase it out. I'm just really actually curious, do you support affirmative action? No.
Sure. So I think when it comes to let's talk about discrimination. So there's actually discrimination. There's a racist and an anti-racist form of discrimination. And when people think of discrimination, they think about it as purely racist. But when you actually think about, there's actually two ways in which discrimination works. One form of discrimination creates equity. Another form of discrimination creates inequity. One form of discrimination repairs inequity of the past. The other form of discrimination does quite the opposite. And the reason why I don't really want to talk about, because I actually talk about this in my book, and the book I'm writing now, and I have it more sort of, it's more polished, but I think it's critical because I think people who have advocated for racial justice, I think it's critical. They typically push back against the idea that affirmative action is a form of discrimination. And I think, and so those who have a basic knowledge of discrimination, it's hard for them to see how that's not discrimination. And so I don't push back against that. I say, yeah, that is discrimination, actually anti-racist discrimination. And that we need, and it's impossible to create equity when there's past discrimination without present discrimination. It's impossible. And I think anybody can think about any room, right, in which you have all white people, right, and only a set number of seats. How do you create equity in that room? How do you create equity in that room without excluding some white people? And ideally, we would broaden the room, right, and create more seats, but how do you do that?
And that may be a more honest way of talking about it than just avoiding it. Yeah. We can take at least one more. Yes, Karen.
Holy shit. Holy shit. That is the clip that we have been looking for, ladies and gentlemen. That is the clip that we have been waiting for all day. This is why we do happy hour. Holy shit. Ibram X Kendi literally just said the only way to actually create equity is through discrimination. Wow. All right, guys, we have got about 10 more minutes of this presentation. That one single clip just made this entire presentation worthwhile. This is why we do happy hour, folks, and this is why we always watch the Q&A, because it almost always comes up in the Q&A. For those of you who missed it, Ibram X Kendi literally just said that the only way to create equity is through discrimination. But he called it anti-racist discrimination, so it was okay. It's an acceptable form of discrimination, and that's the only way we're going to get to equity. Wow. Well, we do have about 10 more minutes to this presentation, guys. Please make sure you mount that like button if you have not already. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel. We do happy hour every Friday at 5 p.m. And of course, tomorrow, we're going to be doing Socialism Saturday, but it's going to be at 6 p.m. We start 1 hour later on Saturdays because I have a life too. It's my weekend too, all right? So we will be doing Socialism Saturday. I don't know what we're watching. Effin, I literally just replayed it so I could clip it, so I'm not replaying it again. You can rewind, though, and watch. But let's get through the last 10 minutes of the presentation, guys, and then we can all go off and enjoy our illustrious St. Patrick's Day.
I want to just sort of follow up with that.
Why don't you get the mic, because we're trying to tape it. Thanks, Melissa.
I'm interested in the affirmative action question too, and I think it might be, and I think this is what is going on here at Yale too, is that the MCAT is, if we look at it this way, the MCAT is a racist test.
Yes.
And that if we drop the MCAT
Really?
or reduce it in its influence and in terms of admissions, then we can use other standards to make
The
measurements
MCAT is a
as to
racist
how
test.
somebody
Okay.
did. And this would, but the problem is over the past 50 years, the MCAT and the SAT and the GRE and all of these other standardized tests have become the one and single only standard in people's minds as to where they need to rank in order to get into a university.
Yes, I will be posting
And
the clip.
so we have
Absolutely.
taken this
Not tonight, though,
racist
probably tomorrow.
measurement and sexist measurements that is where we think, or people think, that it is the one and only way that we can measure a student's intelligence. And so some schools are starting to either reduce the influence of the MCAT, and Yale is being criticized for this right now, or SAT or whatever. And some schools are dropping these tests entirely. I think that's partially what they're trying to do, is they're trying to drop what they see as, I don't know if they would say it's a racist test. So I'd like to know a little bit more about how your center is, and I think this is where the other questioner was going to. Where's your center focusing on policy in terms of affirmative action?
So I guess David had asked me to comment on the center, and I
Sure.
did not. I'm sorry. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. I mean, the center is organized around 6 different sort of policy areas: education, environment, economy, justice, health, and politics. And the goal ultimately is to build these fellowship programs in those 6 areas that would allow us to team up to tackle a major inequity in that specific area, a team of a scholar, a policy maker, an activist, and a journalist. And these 4 professionals would each teach courses at AU. Their students would become almost like their research assistants. And they would do everything from investigating a racial inequity that we've already identified, and we've chosen them to actually sort of tackle it because that's their expertise. Investigating in all of its intersections, to figuring out, okay, what are the racist policies causing this racial inequity, to innovating corrective policies, to disseminating those innovations and the research undergirding them, all leading up to a campaign of change that would literally figure out a local partner to work with to implement those policies, or create a campaign of change that would potentially force the implementation of those policies. And so really that's the sort of main thrust. Certainly at a particular point in time, one of the issues the ed team I would like for them to tackle would be this question of standardized testing. And I would say that, again, standardized tests create racial inequity. And I think everybody would agree with that. But then what happens is we think that that means that Black people, Latinx people, Native people are the problem, as opposed to the tests themselves. And so what if we say, okay, you know what, these groups are equal, so it must mean that something's wrong with the test and not the people. Maybe there's no such thing as an achievement gap. And so, but of course, those who benefit from those tests, because they're able to get into Yale, because their parents are able to pay for a high-priced tutor that boosts their score 300 points. But then, of course, and then they imagine that they're smarter than the kid who got 200 points less than them. You see that math in there, right? You know, and they'll never tell anybody about that, right? But at the same time, it's smart to be taking advantage of that, right? We also know that standardized test prep programs and facilities are concentrated in white and Asian neighborhoods. And so so I think people can understand why they get higher scores than other groups of people. I took the GRE and took a Kaplan course, and it boosted my score. And I actually write a little bit about that in my current book. And so everybody knows these tests fundamentally on their own are not tests that literally are able to measure intelligence, because the MCAT really only shows how you're going to do your first year. And so in the case of Baki, and this is what I write about. So one of the things that the lawyers did.
I don't drink all of PorcFest. I'm much more likely to be smoking weed during PorcFest. So you guys can talk about all the beers I'm not drinking you want. But there are other indulgences at PorcFest that are not beer, is all I'm saying. We're going to have a real good time. Don't you worry about it, all right?
Is they found that the students who were receiving the quote quotas had lower MCAT scores, but they were just as likely to graduate and get licensed. So, I mean, everybody understand that. So, but the test was,
He's still
I would
complaining
argue,
about the MCAT.
discriminating against them. Right? Because
How?
they, and Black people of color, even though we're just as likely to graduate and get licensed.
Black people of color? What the fuck is he talking about? Black people? Are there black people that are not of color? Ibram?
I mean, what is the purpose of a professional school if it's not to graduate and get licensed and go on to a good career? They didn't have as much access to these opportunities because of this barrier test as other people.
I had terrible GRE scores. I should have taken that calculus. Damn. One last quick questions and then we got to wrap it up.
Oh, you're saying white people can have bad GRE scores too? Oh, all right.
While anti-racist discrimination is indeed right, isn't the question the number of seats in the room?
That is,
The
yeah.
ultimate policy that would be anti-racist would be to challenge the limited number of seats and to create a much more equitable society based on socialism.
I had a hunch you were going.
So I'm happy you say this, because I think you begin to see, particularly, we talked earlier about intersectional theory. And so it's very difficult for someone to look upon, for instance, Black women as equal to Black men if they're not a feminist.
What?
Right. And so it's very difficult for people to not look upon the Black poor as equal to Black elites if they're not a socialist. And so
What?
you begin to see how these.
Hang on. Whoa, 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 whoa. I may have spoken too soon. Did you guys hear what Ibram X Kendi just said? It's very difficult to look at the Black poor alongside the Black elites and not view them as equal unless you're unless you're a socialist. We're going to clip that. Hang on. Sorry. I thought we were done. We were not done. We're not done at all. Clipping now. Hang on. Where's my little clipping machine? God damn it. Got it up. Where the fuck did the program go? One sec, guys. Sorry, my program is being persnickety today. There it is. Now it's up. Now we can clip. Standing by. Clipping now.
Isn't the question the number of seats in the room?
That is,
The
yeah.
ultimate policy that would be anti-racist would be to challenge the limited number of seats and to create a much more equitable society based on socialism.
I had a hunch you were going.
So I'm happy you say this, because I think you begin to see, particularly, we talked earlier about intersectional theory. And so it's very difficult for someone to look upon, for instance, Black women as equal to Black men if they're not a feminist, right? And so it's very difficult for people to not look upon the Black poor as equal to Black elites if they're not a socialist. And so you begin to see how these other sort of ideologies, for the lack of a better term, are crucial in terms of people articulating notions of equality between racial groups. And so I think in order to truly create an anti-racist society, you would have to create a larger room. I completely agree, and that's why I said that. Like, that would be the first sort of thing. You create the larger room. But I was just saying, in lieu of that, right, how do you create an equity if you're not creating that larger room? That larger room, and I think this is the key, would not just benefit Black people, it would benefit people of color, it would benefit white people. And I think one of the most glaring misconceptions about racism is that it has actually materially benefited all white people equally, and that generally speaking, it benefits white people. And you begin to see, when you study the way in which, and we see this over the last sort of 40 and 50 years, in the way in which people using racist ideas have climbed into positions of power, and they've used those positions to essentially benefit a particular class. And that has harmed not only people of color, but that's harmed the white middle class, who largely put them in power because they were manipulated by racist ideas, which those people knew they can manipulate them by. Right, and so you see that happening. And so I think I wanted people to sort of see the way in which anti-racism is not just beneficial for people of color, it's most beneficial for them, but it's certainly beneficial for all people, except of course a very small group of super rich.
You know, this country created a bigger room. It's called the public school and the public university. Yeah. But they're in trouble. I wouldn't have an education without public schools and public universities. Yeah, I say this here at Yale. Dare I say this here. But anyway, I think we're going to.
Holy shit. That clip is filled with so much. That clip basically just admitted that the public schools are socialist. Thank you for that, Yale professor. That clip was everything. That clip is the moment that we've been waiting for all night. That was an amazing one. All right, guys, I think that we're basically done, but let's just wrap up here. They have about 1 more minute and then we'll have a chat.
I have to wrap this. I want you to Thank you all for coming.
I guess that's basically it. Well, guys, we got Ibram X Kendi basically admitting he's a socialist. I feel particularly proud of that. Guys, that has been Happy Hour. We watch Happy Hour every Friday where we watch real woke trainings and university lectures and all sorts of things. And we talk about them and we drink some beer, sometimes on an empty stomach, as I did today. And it hits us a little harder than it normally does. But guys, just a reminder that I will be back for Happy Hour tomorrow at 6 p.m. We're starting a little later for Happy Hour on Saturday because it's my weekend too. But if you have not already, I definitely want to encourage you to make sure you are subscribed to my Substack, Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. I should be having something coming out tomorrow probably tomorrow and Sunday, to be quite frank, on the Substack. So you want to make sure you subscribe to that. And also, if you become a supporter, by joining my YouTube channel as a paying member, by joining my Substack as a paying subscriber, by joining my locals community, or by joining my Patreon, you can find all the links at activelyunwoke.com/support. You will be able to join my supporter Discord. And in my supporter Discord, we will invite you to movie night on Sunday at 8 p.m. And we are watching Gangs of New York. I am so excited. I love this movie so much. I think it's going to be great. If you've never seen Gangs of New York, definitely come to movie night on Sunday at 8 p.m. We do movie night almost every single Sunday. So if you don't like this movie, just join us anyway. We'll have a different movie next week. And as a reminder, my month of narcissism is coming up. We are on the verge of yet another Carlin's month of narcissism, which is basically Aries season. I'm an Aries for people who don't know. I will be behaving as an extra overt narcissist during my 1 month of narcissism. I might even be doing a presentation called Embrace Your Inner Narcissist. We will be doing lots of stuff during the month of April because it's my month, mother effers. It's the way it goes. We will be watching Killer Clowns from Outer Space for movie night during my month of narcissism because during my month of narcissism, I get to pick out all the movies for movie night. We're watching American Beauty. We're watching The Legend of Billie Jean. We're watching Killer Clowns from Outer Space. We're watching The Wolf of Wall Street. And we're watching something else, and I forget what that other thing is, but it's going to be awesome. Oh, Wet Hot American Summer. That's the other movie we're watching for my month of narcissism. It's going to be great, guys. I will see you back tomorrow at 6 p.m. for Socialism Saturday. I will announce what we're watching. I don't know yet, but I'm looking for a good Black feminist presentation for Yasmin because she's been asking for it for a couple of weeks. So hopefully I'll be able to find that. But if we don't find that, I'm going to find something else amazing. I promise. I will see you guys for Socialism Saturday tomorrow at 6 p.m. In the meantime, take care. Enjoy your St. Patrick's Day. Don't do anything I wouldn't do. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. Have fun.